She walked into a Mafia funeral in a wedding dress. Wrong church, wrong day, wrong man, or so she thought. His rules were simple. Wear my name, play my wife. Don't ask for more. But Audrey had already survived one man who thought she was manageable. She wasn't about to let another one be right. The runaway bride who stumbled into Silvio Gallo's world didn't just survive it. She made it hers. And the most dangerous man in Providence, he never saw her coming. Audrey Palmer, 25, was running barefoot from her own wedding before the white dress could become a cage. Her shoes hit the pavement first. The veil tore loose in the rain. White flowers scattered behind her. Behind her, Max Gordon's voice tore across the garden. "Audrey, get back here! You're not doing this to me!" She ran harder. The street blurred beneath her bare feet. The old stone church at the end of the block, its doors open. She ran toward it. By the time she reached the church doors, she had no breath left and no plan. She pushed inside, stumbled halfway up the aisle, and stopped. A funeral. Rows of dark suits. A coffin at the altar, every head turning toward the bride covered in mud. Behind her, two men closed the doors. The lock clicked. Her voice came out thin, still breathless. I'm sorry." She turned back toward the door, but the men standing in front of it didn't move. And then Max's voice hit the wood behind her. "Audrey." Lower now. Worse than the shouting. "I know you're in there. Open the door." She stood in the center aisle with mud on the hem of her gown, rain on her skin, and her heart still beating against the words she'd heard 1 hour before the ceremony. "Audrey, she's a good girl, good wife material, predictable, manageable. But you, oh, you're wildfire." Max had said it with his hands on another woman, his mouth on hers, like the words cost him nothing. The door shook behind her. "You are not turning my wedding into a scandal. 300 people are waiting. Open this door, right now." Audrey turned back toward the altar. That was when she saw him. He was walking toward her from the far end of the aisle, steady, deliberate, as if her arrival had simply confirmed something he'd been waiting on. Pale blue eyes that hit before anything else. Tall, sharp jaw, cheekbones that could cut glass. His gaze didn't wander, it challenged. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to adjust her focus upward before she found his face. His head tilted slightly to the right, the way a person looks when an interruption has just become interesting. Those eyes, pale blue, almost cold, moved over her without hurry. Bare feet, ruined hem, mascara down to her jaw. The corner of his mouth lifted, slow and dangerous. "Run away, bride." His voice came deep, steady, and far too sure of itself. Running from something. Audrey's breath caught. His expression hadn't moved. He was watching her with the patient attention of someone who had already decided to wait her out. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. But it held. "Sir, please, I can't marry him. If there's another way out of this building, I'll take it, and you'll never see me again." She kept her eyes on his. "I just need a door." The corner of the tall man's mouth moved, not quite a smile. When he spoke, his voice came low and certain. "I needed a solution. You walked in dressed as the answer." She searched his face. Nothing in it offered her anything useful. "Okay, I don't know what that means. I just need to leave. Please." He didn't answer. He tilted his chin toward the door behind her. "Who is that?" She swallowed. "My fiancé, Max Gordon." His jaw tightened once and released. Slow, controlled. A short, low sound came out of him, stripped of any warmth. So, like setting something fragile down. "Max Gordon?" She watched his face. "You know him?" His eyes came back to hers. "Unfortunately." He extended his hand between them, palm up. "Come with me." Outside, Max's voice dropped further. Audrey, open this door before I lose my patience. You are not turning my wedding into a scandal. She looked at the offered hand, thought, back door, side exit. He's moving me out of the way. She had nothing else left to reason with, and the door handle was rattling now from outside, that familiar, impatient sound. She took his hand. No keys, no phone, no plan. Just a stranger's hand in a church full of armed men. And somehow, God help her, it was still better than going back. His grip closed around hers, immediate, certain, and he moved, drawing her with him down the center aisle. The rows of men tracked their progress without turning their bodies. She kept her eyes forward. The coffin passed on her left, dark flowers, that heavy smell. She didn't look at it. A man rose from the front pew. He had the same bone structure as the man holding her hand, same jaw, same width of shoulder, but lighter hair, cropped close, and pale blue eyes moving quickly between the two of them. "Silvio!" The word landed like a hand on a table. "What the hell are you doing?" The man beside her stopped. He turned toward the other man, slowly, the unhurried patience of someone who finds the question slightly below his level. "I'm getting married, Aldo." A small, certain smile. Said the way you state a time or a weather forecast. Audrey froze. She felt it. The warmth of his palm, the easy certainty of his grip, as though the matter were already settled and she simply hadn't been informed. Silvio. That was his name. She'd just heard it. She pulled her hand back, hard. He turned to face her fully. The pale blue eyes found hers without searching. "You said you'd get me out." Her voice came out flat, barely controlled. "I am." He held her gaze. "Just not in the way you expected." Outside, the door handle rattled again. She looked at it, then back at him. Silvio was watching her like she was the only real thing in the room. She stared at him. "Excuse me." The word came out before she could stop it, low, disbelieving, the kind of voice a person uses when they're not sure they heard correctly, and very sure they did. "You just told that man you're getting married. To me. You don't even know my name." His expression didn't change. His head tilted slightly, that same unhurried angle, and the almost smile came back to one side of his mouth. "Audrey, I guess." Her chin came up. "I'm not marrying another man just because I ran from one." His eyes stayed on hers. That almost smile again, and beneath it, weight she couldn't name yet. He leaned in, just enough that his voice stayed between them. "Then go back to Max." He straightened. "Or leave this church under my name." His eyes didn't move from hers. "Choose fast, runaway bride." The door shook, not knocking this time. Fists. And then Max's voice, stripped of the careful polish he saved for public rooms. "Audrey, open the damn door!" She didn't move. She was watching Silvio's face, and his expression hadn't changed. Not once. "You don't get to humiliate me over one kiss." Another hit. "My investors are here." The edge of Silvio's mouth moved, colder than a smile, more entertained. Audrey's gaze cut between him and the door. "Please, you need to let me out of here." Silvio Agallo stepped closer. For Audrey, running wasn't an option, neither was silence, so she spoke. "Why won't you just let me leave?" Her voice came out steady. The tremor underneath it was hers alone. "If you know Max Gordon, you know he won't let this go. Whatever you're planning, it won't end here." "No." He held her gaze. "It won't." She straightened her spine. "Then let me." Silvio's hand came up, palm up, steady. She looked at it, then at his face. Her pulse was loud in her ears when she reached out and shook it. Not because she was certain, but because certainty had left the building 20 minutes ago with her shoes, and this was the only door still open. "Silvio Gallo." His grip was firm, brief, a transaction. The man, Max Gordon, should have been smart enough not to anger. "Gallo?" In Providence, that name wasn't said loudly. People used it lower, at restaurant tables, outside church doors, in harbor offices. The way you lower your voice around something you don't want to wake up." Her stomach dropped through the floor, and she felt the cold stone all the way up through her bare feet. "My God! Whose funeral did I just walk into?" "You walked into my father's funeral." His expression quieted. "I need a wife, Audrey, and Max Gordon needs to believe he lost. 2 birds, 1 stone." Max's voice came from somewhere, closer now. His public register back, the one that expected compliance. Predictable, manageable. She pulled her hand back. "Gallo family?" He looked at her the way you look at someone who has just figured out they're in the wrong room. "Yes. But what does that have to do with me?" That sideways smile, small, patient. More than it did 5 minutes ago. Silvio's hand closed around her wrist. Not rough, just certain. "Walk with me, Audrey. You'll understand enough before you regret it." The main doors hit the wall. "Where is she?" Max's voice, fully inside now. "Where is my bride?" Silvio released her wrist, turned. "Tony." His voice dropped. Not louder, just different. The man nearest the side door straightened immediately. "Priest, 2 witnesses, not Aldo." His chin lifted once. "And someone find a ring." The side room smelled of old hymnals and candle wax. Audrey was standing in the center of it, bare feet, wide eyes, the muddy hem of her gown pooling around her, watching 2 men she didn't know position themselves as witnesses while a priest she'd never met opened a worn leather book with the practiced speed of a man who had learned not to ask questions. Silvio stepped close. Too close. Close enough that it wasn't accidental. He leaned down, his mouth near her ear, his voice low enough that it barely existed. "Just say, yes?" His breath was warm against her skin. She felt it land there and kept her eyes forward. "I ran from the rain straight into the storm." She swallowed, then low enough that only he could hear. "Then, this is a deal. You protect me from Max. I'll be useful to you, whatever this marriage needs." Just long enough for it to land. "But you don't touch me. That's not part of it." Silvio looked at her, long enough that she felt it. "As you wish." The priest was already speaking. Audrey wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to Max's voice through the wall. 2 years of making herself smaller, all of it landing here. The priest looked at her. She lifted her chin. "Yes." Her voice came out thin. But it came out. Silvio's hand took hers, the left one. A ring, cold and thick, pressed against her finger and slid home. She looked down at it, a man's signet ring turned inward so the face pressed against her palm. Borrowed, improvised. Somehow that made it feel more real, not less. Audrey Gallo, low, certain, said like it had already been true for years. "You're my wife now." He walked her back through the main church the way he'd moved through it before, like the room existed for the convenience of his passing. And this time she was beside him, her hand in his, the borrowed ring pressing against her palm with every step. Max Gordon was standing at the far end of the nave. 2 of his men flanked him. All 3 of them were staring at Audrey like they were waiting for the part that made sense. Silvio didn't slow down. "Max!" His gaze went briefly to the men on either side. "I think you lost something, but I found her." Max's jaw worked. He was recalibrating. She could see it, the way she'd watched him do it 100 times before, that 3-second pause where the calculation happened. His eyes cut to hers, and there it was. Not hurt, not love, not even betrayal, just damage control. Just the question of what this was going to cost him. He straightened his jacket. "Audrey." His voice found its public tone again. Controlled. "Come here right now. We have 300 guests waiting and I have spent 6 months." Silvio raised one hand, not a gesture, a stop sign. "Max." The words came low and even, the kind of calm that made the 2 men at Max's sides go very still. "You know who you're talking to. That's my wife." He let it land. "Audrey Gallo, watch your tone." The silence in the church was total. Max opened his mouth, closed it. She watched him do the math in real time, watched his shoulders drop a fraction, watched the anger fold itself into something more careful. "What is this?" he said finally, quieter. "Audrey, what did you do?" She was holding Silvio's hand. She hadn't planned to hold it this long. but her fingers closed tighter around his, not for him, she told herself, for her, and she looked at the man who had called her predictable while kissing someone else an hour before their wedding. "You heard right, Max." Her voice was steady, completely steady. "I'm a bride, just not yours." She held his gaze. "We got married." She'd expected anger. What she got was embarrassment. The specific humiliation of a man who had lost something in front of an audience and knew everyone saw it. Silvio turned his head. 1 degree. His men were already reading it. The 2 men near the door were already moving. "Remove them!" The words came without heat. "Before I have to make this a different kind of conversation." Max took 1 step back, then another. His men were already guiding him, not roughly, but certainly so, toward the door, and she watched him go, watched his shoulders tighten, watched him not look back. The doors closed. Silvio looked at her. Her fingers hadn't let go of his. "Now, my bride." His thumb moved once across her knuckles, unhurried, unbothered, like the last 10 minutes had been a minor scheduling adjustment. "Wipe your tears. We're going home." She hadn't realized she was crying. She pressed her free hand to her face, and her fingers came away damp, and she thought, "Oh, right." Behind them, slow applause. She turned. Aldo was standing at the front of the nave, hands moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm, amusement and contempt sharing equal space on his face. "Quite a performance, Silvio." His eyes moved to the coffin, then back. "At our father's funeral, no less." Silvio turned to face him. He didn't release her hand. "Our father knew how to turn every moment into an opportunity, Aldo." His voice carried no edge. No heat, just certainty. He would have understood. He held his brother's gaze for 1 more second, then he dipped his chin once toward the coffin and turned back toward the door. He didn't look at her when he said it. "Come." She followed, and somewhere between the church doors and the afternoon light beyond them, Audrey thought, "The man I thought I loved saw me as something to manage. And now I belong to a man whose name makes this city flinch. What am I supposed to do with that?" The limousine moved in silence. Audrey was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, the borrowed ring cold against her palm, her feet pulled slightly under the hem of her gown. The mud had dried on them somewhere between the church and the car. She could feel the grit, the dried grass, the particular proof of someone who had run from one life without thinking about what she was running toward. She could also feel him watching, without turning her head. "Stop staring." 1 brow lifted. "Barely. Have you never seen a barefoot woman before?" She kept her eyes on the window. "Not like you." His voice was easy, unbothered. She shifted in her seat, tugged at the neckline of her dress, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Outside the tinted glass, Providence was sliding past. Buildings, streetlights, a city that didn't know her life had ended and restarted within the span of a single morning. She felt him lean in, his mouth close to her ear, close enough that she registered the warmth before the words arrived. "You still look beautiful." The rest went unspoken. She heard it anyway. Audrey's throat tightened. She swallowed once, carefully, and kept her green eyes on the window. She did not turn to look at him. She wasn't sure what she'd find in his face if she did, and she wasn't ready to find out. The gates were iron and enormous, set into a stone wall that had clearly been there longer than anyone alive. They opened without being asked. Beyond them, the estate spread across a gentle rise, a mansion that looked less built than grown, pale stone and high windows, and a roofline that suggested generations of people who had always expected to be taken seriously. Behind it, barely visible in the grey of the afternoon, the ocean. 5 cars had come through those gates. The Gallo family travelled in formation. The limousine stopped, the door opened, Audrey stepped out. Her bare foot hit the gravel first. Sharp, immediate, the kind of pain that arrives before you can decide how to handle it. She managed half a step before it showed on her face. She couldn't stop it. Silvio was already there. In one motion he lifted her, arm behind her knees, hand at her back, and carried her across the gravel toward the front steps like a decision he'd already made. Her hands found his shoulder on instinct. "What are you doing?" His eyes straight ahead. "Would you prefer the gravel?" She turned her face toward the front steps. He carried her up 3 wide stone steps and stopped at the threshold while the heavy front door swung open before them. For a moment he looked down at her, that same slight angle to his head. Traditional, as it turns out. He set her down on the marble, stepped back, and she was standing inside the Gallo estate on her bare feet with mud still on her hem and mascara she hadn't thought about since the church corridor. 5 staff members stood waiting in the entrance hall. Silvio shrugged off his jacket in one fluid motion and turned to face them, voice unhurried but reaching every corner of the room. "This woman is the mistress of this house, Mrs. Gallo." He let it settle. "Treat her right." 5 heads dipped in unison. Audrey stood in the middle of the hall, its ceiling high above her, a chandelier casting light across pale stone floors. She pressed her arms together in front of her without meaning to. "My parents are still at the venue." She kept her voice level. "I have no phone, no bag, nothing. If Max decides to—" "He won't." Silvio was loosening his tie, fingers working the knot, eyes on her the entire time. "Max Gordon saw you leave with me. He knows what it would cost him to touch anything of mine." Of mine. She'd noticed the phrasing. She chose not to address it yet. He reached into his jacket and held out his phone. "Call them. In a few days, we'll have them here. They'll see the house." The ghost of a smile. "And their son-in-law." She took the phone. Her fingers closed around it. Silvio's eyes moved over her once. Brief. Assessing. "Are you employed?" "I'm the general manager's assistant." She paused. "At Max's company." Silvio's smile widened. "Just slightly. Just enough. Then Max has already accepted your resignation." Before she could respond, the front door opened. Aldo Gallo, Silvio Gallo's brother, came in the way he always seemed to, timing it perfectly. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from Silvio to Audrey, bare feet, ruined dress, borrowed ring, and then back to Silvio. A slow exhale through his nose. Then the laugh came, quiet and genuine, like he'd just seen the punchline of a very long joke. "Silvio." He shook his head slowly. "You couldn't even let someone else have the moment at our father's funeral." His gaze settled on Audrey, making a slow circuit that she felt on her skin. "You actually brought her home." Audrey didn't move. She stood where she was, arms crossed, tight against her chest, and studied him despite herself. Same jaw as Silvio, same height, same precision in how he held his shoulders, but lighter hair, lighter coloring, and those eyes, pale blue, identical in shade, cold in a different register. Aldo stepped closer. He bent slightly, bringing his face level with hers, examining her the way someone examines an unexpected find. "Clean her up a little. She's not bad. Nice hair." His hand came up toward the strand that had fallen across her face. Audrey's head moved back before he could reach it. 2 steps. That was all Silvio needed. "Hands, Aldo." His voice was level, quiet, the kind of quiet that made the room pay attention. "She's a Gallo now. Touch what's mine and you'll explain it to our father yourself." Aldo raised both hands, unbothered. His eyes moved back to Audrey, the amusement in them steady and practiced. "I was just saying hello to my new sister-in-law." He glanced sideways at Silvio. "Though you've always had unconventional taste, mine tends to be more—" Silvio turned back toward the hall, done with the conversation. "Goodbye, Aldo." Another low laugh. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "I'll leave you lovebirds alone." He looked back at Audrey, drew one last appraisal, then leaned close to her ear. "He's a bit rough in bed. Try not to make too much noise." He straightened. "We're still burying our father." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a sound that felt entirely too relaxed for everything that had just happened. Audrey stood in the silence. Her jaw was tight. She became aware of it and made herself release it. Silvio's voice came from beside her, calm as weather. "That's how Aldo says hello." She turned to look at him. His expression was entirely serious, or close enough that she couldn't tell the difference. "Give it a week." She stared at him for one long moment. Then she turned to the nearest staff member, because the alternative was saying something she didn't have the energy for. "Could someone show me to a room?" Silvio turned to the staff. "Prepare Mrs. Gallo's room." The corner of his mouth curved, just slightly, and he winked at her. Full of himself, Audrey thought. "Of course I'm getting my own room." Then he looked back at the staff without waiting for her reaction. "Everything she needs. Clothes, shoes." He was already moving toward the stairs. "I want it all ready in an hour." Audrey exhaled slowly. These people, she thought. They're like characters who walked straight out of a dark Mafia novel. Audrey was halfway up the stairs when his voice came from behind her. "Mrs. Gallo." She turned. Silvio held his phone out toward her. "Call your family. Let them know you're safe." The guest room was large enough to be its own world. High ceilings, tall windows, a bed she could have slept across sideways. Bigger than her apartment. She sat on the edge of it, Silvio's phone in both hands, and looked at it. Silvio Gallo's personal phone, in my hands, in his house, wearing his name. She found her mother's number from memory and pressed call. The line picked up on the first ring. "Audrey?" Her mother's voice, thin and unsteady, caught somewhere between relief and panic. "What is happening? We came home. Your father and I. The wedding just fell apart. Max was furious. We didn't know where you were. We were about to call the police." "Mom," she kept her voice steady, "I'm safe. I need you to hear that first. Where are you? Are you—" "I couldn't marry Max. I'll explain everything, I promise." She pressed her free hand flat against her knee. "But I need you to know, I got married this morning, to someone else." Silence. "Audrey Palmer, have you completely lost your mind?" "I'm fine. I'm safe. In 2 days I'll bring you to where I am." She closed her eyes. "I love you. Please don't call the police." She ended the call before her mother could ask the next question. The phone sat in her hands. The room sat around her. She needed a hot shower. She needed about 48 hours of sleep. She needed her entire life to make some kind of sense. What she got instead was the sound of gunshots. She was on her feet before she understood why. She was at the window before she'd made the decision to move, both palms flat against the glass, looking down into the grounds below. The estate's back garden stretched wide and then wilder, and there, on the far lawn with the ocean grey behind him, was Silvio. Sleeves folded back to his elbows, rifle raised. He tracked something only he was watching, fired. A clay disc shattered in the air. He didn't watch it fall, already tracking the next one. She could see his forearms from here, the muscle in them, the faint trace of veins, the stillness in his shoulders between shots. His face was turned away, but she could read the concentration in him. Absolute. Each shot placed like a decision he'd already stopped second-guessing. Crack. Another disc. Gone. Audrey pressed her palm flat against the glass. Every shot rang through the estate like a period at the end of a sentence she hadn't finished reading, like something from her old life being crossed out, one clean line at a time. She watched him reload without looking down at his hands. This morning she had been standing in a church corridor, holding white peonies. Now she was standing in a borrowed room in a Mafia estate, wearing a signet ring that didn't fit, watching a man she'd married 3 hours ago fire a rifle into the grey Providence sky. Each shot was like a bullet fired into the life she'd had before. She understood that now, with her palm against cold glass and bare feet on cold marble, and a name she hadn't chosen pressing quietly against everything she'd thought she was. Audrey Palmer had walked into that church. Audrey Gallo was standing at this window, and she had no idea yet what that woman was going to do next. The hot water was running when Audrey stepped under it, and she let it run until the pipes gave nothing more. When she stepped out, the dress was waiting on the bed. Black. Not just dark. Black the way a decision is black. Clean lines, no embellishment, the fabric pulling exactly where it was supposed to. Heels beside it, slim and deliberate. Someone had chosen these, knowing what they'd do. She looked at the nightstand. Silvio's phone was gone. Had he been in her room? She turned to the window. Below, a pergola, a fire pit already burning. Silvio sat at the far end still, and beyond it all, the ocean. She picked up the dress, the heels. In the mirror, freckles across the bridge of her nose, green eyes catching the lamplight, hair still damp at the ends. She looked like she was walking into a gala, not a day that had started with her running barefoot through a ruined wedding. The corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Then I'll throw my own party," she murmured. She bent and picked up the wedding gown from the floor, muddy hem, torn tulle, white that wasn't white anymore, and walked out the door. Silvio was in the pergola. He was sitting with the ease of a man who owned the chair, the rifle leaning against the armrest like it had always been there. Whiskey, amber in the firelight, resting against his knee as he watched the flames and, beyond them, the dark line of the ocean. Audrey walked past him. close enough that she felt the warmth of the fire before she reached it, and stopped at the edge of the pit. He watched her go. The flames were pulling toward her in the draught from the sea. She held the wedding gown out over the fire. Her fingers stayed closed for one breath. 2. Then she opened her hand. The tulle caught before it even reached the flames. All that fabric, built for one specific day and no other. It lit from the bottom and moved upward in a long, clean sweep, and Audrey watched it without looking away. The tightness she'd been carrying since that corridor, that half-open door, those words, slowly, finally, releasing. 2 years. The thought arrived quietly, the way the truest things do. 2 years of swallowing criticism, softening her edges, becoming easier, quieter, smaller. She had thought that was love. Max Gordon had called it manageable. The white silk went orange, then dark. The fire was moving through it like it was correcting a mistake. Steady, thorough, final. She felt the heat on her face and didn't step back. She didn't turn. From the chair behind her came the slow creak of weight shifting forward. Then Silvio's voice, barely a murmur, low enough to be just for himself. "There you are, Audrey. You really are something on fire, aren't you?" The last of the gown collapsed into the fire. She stood over it until it was fully gone, and then she turned. Silvio had been watching her from the moment she reached the fire pit. His eyes moved over her slowly, the black dress, the way she stood at the edge of those flames without flinching. His chin dipped once, almost imperceptibly. His tongue touched his lower lip and pulled back. Runaway bride. The thought moved through him quietly. You've become someone else entirely. He was watching her over the rim of his glass as she turned. She walked toward him through the firelight, the black dress moving with her, heels steady on the stone, the heat of the fire still on the back of her neck. She could feel his eyes on her the whole way. She didn't slow down. She stopped 2 feet away. His gaze hadn't moved from her face. For a moment she didn't speak. She stood there and let the silence do its work. Let him see all of it. The green eyes that weren't looking away. I'm not that girl anymore. The words came out even, certain. Whatever this arrangement is, I'll hold up my end. She refused retreat, and the next words came out quieter, each one placed with care. No one is ever going to make me small again. The fire crackled behind her. Silvio looked at her. He measured instead of reacting. Then the corner of his mouth pulled sideways, not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. He leaned back. He raised his glass toward her. Good. His eyes stayed on hers as he took a slow sip. Small women don't survive in this house. Before she could respond, a figure appeared at the edge of the pergola. One of the security team, broad and watchful, carrying the particular stillness of men who only approach when they have to. He stopped just short of the firelight. Boss? His voice was low. Max Gordon's at the gate. 5 men with him. He's asking to talk. Silvio didn't look at the man. He raised his glass and drank. Eyes on Audrey, nowhere else. Then once more, he set the glass down. Bring him to the front garden. His voice carried no particular feeling about it. Keep him out of the house. He rose from the chair in one motion. The rifle came off the armrest and onto his shoulder. I was wondering when he'd start barking. He looked at Audrey once more, his eyes steady on hers, unreadable. And then he turned toward the house. Audrey watched him go from where she stood, the fire still burning behind her, the pergola around her, the night coming in from the ocean. She pulled in a slow breath. The dress was burning behind her. Max Gordon was waiting ahead. Audrey lifted her chin and followed Silvio into her first war as Mrs. Gallo. The mansion door opened and Silvio walked out. He came down the front steps without adjusting his pace for the audience waiting below. The rifle was still on his shoulder. 12 Gallo men had formed a loose ring around the garden. Inside it, Max Gordon and the 5 he'd brought with him, going nowhere. Max hadn't moved. He was standing in the gravel with his hands at his sides, sweat at his temples, working very hard at looking calm. Silvio reached the last step and stopped. He looked down at all of it from there and tilted his head slightly to one side. Max? His voice carried across the garden without effort. You've got some nerve showing up here. Max straightened his jacket. His jaw was working. Mr. Gallo. His hands came up slowly. Silvio. He spread them in a gesture meant to convey reason. There must be a misunderstanding. Audrey had an extremely difficult day. She's not herself. Marrying a woman when she's in that state. His voice tightened. A man with your reputation wouldn't want this kind of story attached to his name. Hand her over. We'll resolve this quietly. Silvio looked at him. Then that smile arrived. Slow, sideways, carrying no warmth at all. Reputation. He let the words sit in the air. You came to my gate, barking, chasing a bride who ran from her own wedding? His eyes narrowed slightly. That's your idea of reputation, Max. Audrey isn't in shock. Audrey woke up, and when she did, the first thing she saw clearly was exactly how small a man you are. Max's throat moved. He glanced at the men surrounding him, then back at Silvio's face. Look, you know how it is. Sometimes a man wants a little... Silvio's eyebrows lifted. His tone hadn't changed. If anything, it had gotten quieter. You cheated on her, on your wedding day. That's what you're telling me. The silence between them stretched. Interesting. He sounded genuinely entertained. Max exhaled through his nose. This situation doesn't have to damage our business relationship. He shifted. And consider this. Audrey's passport, her ID. Everything is still in her bag, in my car. He let that land. No priest performs a ceremony without identification. On paper, Audrey is still my bride. Silvio descended the final step. He came to a stop a few feet from Max, the slight smile on his face closer to pity now. The rifle came off his shoulder. He set the butt of it against the ground. Easy. Max, his voice dropped, almost conversational now. Do you still think the world runs like a filing cabinet? He glanced once toward the far tree line, toward the direction of the church. This is Providence. That church was built by my great-grandfather. His eyes came back. In the Gallo family, a marriage isn't sealed by paperwork. It's sealed by a given word and a priest's blessing. The smile again. Patient. As for the records, when you go to City Hall tomorrow morning, you'll find Audrey's last name has already changed. Max opened his mouth. The front door opened behind Silvio. Audrey came down the steps in the black dress, and she moved like she meant it. Chin up, shoulders back, heels certain on the stone. She crossed the distance to Silvio's side and stopped there, close enough that their arms almost touched. Her heart was knocking against her ribs. She didn't let it show. Silvio turned his head just slightly. He looked at her. Max stared. Audrey's eyes found him across the garden, green, clear, nothing soft in them. Where's your little girlfriend? Her voice was even. I thought I was boring, manageable. She tilted her head. You don't want me back, Max. You want your reputation back. Max's face moved through several things at once. He landed on control, or a version of it. Audrey! He took a step forward, and two of Silvio's men moved almost imperceptibly. He stopped. Come on. If I hadn't put that ring on your finger, you'd still be some assistant nobody's ever heard of. I made you. Everything you have. That's mine. Audrey looked at him. Her posture didn't change. Her face didn't change, but the set of her shoulders eased. Barely, almost nothing, like she'd just set down a weight she'd been carrying a long time. You're right. Her voice was even. You did show me things I'd never seen. Her chin lifted just a fraction, including things on our wedding day I was never supposed to see. Max's jaw tightened. Then Silvio's arm came around her waist. He pulled her in, one arm, certain, no warning. Audrey felt the pressure of it against the small of her back, the solid warmth of him at her side, and for one instant, standing in front of the man who had called her manageable, a quiet settled in her chest she hadn't felt all day. Good, she thought. Let him see this. Silvio's free hand came up. His fingers found her chin, gently, deliberate, and turned her face toward his. She had exactly 1 second to understand what was happening. Her hand found his chest before she decided to put it there. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, steady where hers wasn't. And for 1 second she held herself back. Performance, she reminded herself. Max is watching. This is for Max. Silvio's mouth found hers, slow, certain. She kissed him back. Except it didn't feel like a performance. From across the garden, Max's voice cracked open. Audrey! What the hell do you think you're doing? She barely heard it. Their lips parted. The space between them stayed narrow, charged, neither of them moving back. Audrey's lips were still slightly parted. She swallowed once, very carefully, and looked away first. Silvio turned to face Max. The easy expression was gone. What replaced it was flat, absolute. "Two rules in Providence, Max." His voice was quiet, completely quiet. "First, you don't touch what's mine." He held that for exactly 1 second. "Second, you don't come back for what's mine." His eyes stayed level. "Audrey is my wife. You have 10 seconds to walk out of here." Max stared at him, then at Audrey, then back. A word left him under his breath, low, hard, and he turned toward the gate. His men followed without being asked. Silvio watched them go. Audrey stood beside him and watched Max's shoulders disappear through the iron gate. 2 years, an entire relationship, and it ended with his back to her, retreating. She had expected to feel more. She felt mostly quiet. "Where did you even find that guy?" Flat, unamused. Silvio turned to look at her. She met his gaze for exactly 1 second. Her voice dropped low and precise. "Silvio Gallo, don't you ever touch me again." She turned and walked back toward the house before he could answer. The stairs were cool marble under her heels. Each step took her further from the garden, from Silvio's eyes when their lips had parted, that steady, unreadable blue. She pressed her palm flat against the door and stood there for a moment. Her heart was still moving too fast. She could feel it, the unsteady rhythm of it, louder than it had any reason to be. Max's face when Silvio had pulled her in, the satisfaction of it. 2 years answered in a single moment, her thumb pressed against her own lower lip without her deciding to. She pushed the door open and went inside. Was it the revenge, or was it the fire in Silvio Gallo's lips? She couldn't decide. The knock came when she was still standing at the window, the garden dark below, the fire pit cold. "Mrs. Gallo." A young woman's voice, careful and correct. "Dinner is ready. Mr. Gallo is waiting." Audrey didn't turn around. "I won't be coming down. I'm resting." Silence on the other side of the door, then footsteps retreating down the hall. She waited until the silence came back. Then she crossed to the mirror. Her fingertips touched her lower lip, barely, just the lightest contact. And she held them there. She'd been kissed before. She knew what a kiss felt like. This had felt like nothing she'd felt before. It was an abnormal day, she told herself. That's all this is. Everything ran hot. Your emotions hit the ceiling and stayed there. That's what happens when your whole life turns over in 12 hours. On the bed behind her, folded at the foot of the mattress, was a black lace sleep set. Short, delicate, clearly expensive, paired with a silk robe. Audrey looked at it for a long moment. "Of course," she muttered, "because nothing says rest after forced marriage and emotional collapse like lingerie." She changed into it anyway. She wasn't going to sleep in a black cocktail dress. Audrey woke up wrong. Wrong bed, wrong room, wrong ceiling above her, wrong light coming through windows she didn't recognize. Downstairs, muffled voices. People moving through a house that wasn't hers, in a life that hadn't been hers 24 hours ago. She sat up and pressed both hands over her face. What have I done? It wasn't really a question. She dropped her hands. The black lace was still on her. The sleep set from the night before, the only thing available, the thing she'd put on because there was nothing else. She pushed back the covers, crossed to the closet, and pulled it open. New tags. Every single piece. Every single piece was black or nearly. Audrey pulled one hanger forward, put it back, pulled another. She stood there for a moment, running her thumb down the seam of a dress that had probably been chosen by someone who knew exactly what it would do on her. Silvio's reach is in every stitch of this wardrobe, she thought. That's what this is. A reminder of who's running what. She chose one of the black dresses. Deep neckline, clean cut, nothing excessive about it except that it worked, and got dressed. She caught her reflection in the mirror. I think I look like a Gallo. The thought arrived unannounced and stayed. I look nothing like the woman who was a manager's assistant 2 days ago. I look like the bride of an empire. She stared at herself for one more second. Oh my, that can't be right. The dining room was empty except for Aldo. He was sitting at the far end of the long table with a glass of champagne and the comfortable posture of a man who owned every room he entered, which Audrey was beginning to understand was a Gallo family trait. He looked up when she walked in. His eyes made a slow, deliberate tour. Well, he set his glass down. Silvio always did know how to dress a package. His head tilted. Though we both know what's still inside, don't we, Audrey? The same little secretary? The same runaway bride? She felt it land. Then she crossed to the opposite end of the table and sat, reaching for the coffee like he hadn't just tried to reduce her to a filing category. Are you Silvio's twin? She kept her eyes on her cup. Aldo's mouth curved. I'm the older one, born 3 minutes before him. She took a sip, looked at him over the rim of the cup. The one born second is the bigger one. You didn't know that? Aldo's eyes narrowed slightly. The smile deepened anyway. Well, he leaned back in his chair, apparently also a smart-ass. Funny. Audrey set her cup down. Max thought I was manageable too. She picked up her fork. Men keep making that mistake. Aldo's smile didn't disappear. It froze, just slightly, just enough that she noticed it, before it recalibrated into deliberate. You think you're dangerous now, he said, voice dropping half a register, because Silvio gave you his name? Audrey set her cup down and met his eyes across the length of the table. No. She held his gaze without hurrying. I think I was dangerous before anyone noticed. Aldo studied her for a long moment. His eyes were the same pale blue as his brother's. But where Silvio's held calculation, Aldo's held appetite. He leaned forward. His voice went lower, the tone of a man choosing to be honest because he thought it would unsettle you. Do you know about the will, Audrey? She kept her face still. Here it comes. Our father's estate. Aldo's fingers moved idly along the stem of his champagne glass. His instructions were specific. Whoever marries first and produces a Gallo heir takes the company, the family leadership, everything. His smile widened. Silvio didn't pull you out of that church, out of chivalry. He needed a wife. You happened to be the cheapest option available. He leaned back. Quite cheap, really, all things considered. The room was quiet. So that's what Silvio got out of it. The will, the company, the throne, or whatever they called it in a family like this. She'd been the fastest available solution, and he'd taken it. She lifted her chin. I know. Her voice was even. We have an agreement. We both get what we need. Agreements have expiration dates. Aldo's tone stayed pleasant. Don't get too comfortable in those clothes, Mrs. Gallo. He tilted his head. And if you're smart, if you're really as sharp as you're pretending to be, you'll figure out which Gallo to stand next to. The terms could work out quite differently for you. The warmth in his expression didn't reach his eyes. The door opened. The man who stepped in was around 50, square-jawed, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades being indispensable. He glanced at Aldo once. Aldo, you're needed on your side of the house. He looked at Audrey. Mr. Gallo is expecting you. She rose. In the hallway, the man fell into step beside her. Mrs. Gallo, I'm Michael Caruso. I've served this family for 25 years. I was your father-in-law's right hand. He spoke quietly, without looking at her. A piece of advice, if you'll take it. Be careful with Aldo. He stopped at a closed door. His tongue isn't the only thing that's poisonous. He opened the door. Not just the tongue. She filed that away without breaking stride. Silvio was at the desk. Laptop open, papers stacked in precise columns beside it, jacket on despite the hour. The version of him that ran things, not the version that carried a rifle across a garden at night. He looked up when she came in. His eyes moved over her once, brief and complete. Good morning, Audrey. She stopped in front of the desk. Good morning. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. She sat. He returned to the document in front of him. She was watching him. The set of his jaw, the way his focus pulled inward, the sharp architecture of his face in the morning light. He looked like a stranger. He also, technically, looked like her husband. She cleared her throat. So? She kept her voice neutral. The will. Silvio's eyes came up from the page. You needed to be married before Aldo. She held his gaze. That's what you were protecting. He looked at her for a moment, then he leaned back. You were in the right place at the right time, Audrey. His voice was matter-of-fact. It works for both of us. Her chin came up. Who would you have married if I hadn't walked in? Someone. He picked up his pen. I would have found a candidate. You were simply—" His eyes returned briefly to hers. Convenient. The word landed cleanly, and she let it. Convenient. Not special. Not chosen. Convenient. Something low in her chest tightened, and she chose not to name it. Fine. She folded her hands in her lap. Then why am I here? Silvio set the pen down. He looked at her fully for the first time since she'd sat down. Your family is coming to dinner tomorrow night. His tone shifted, still level but with new weight behind it. You need them to leave believing this marriage was your choice, that you're happy, that everything is exactly as it should be. Her eyes narrowed. You care what people think? Silvio rose from the chair. He came around the desk slowly, stopping a few feet in front of her. Close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his eyes. Max had been telling his lawyers and the police that you were in shock, that you didn't know what you were signing, that this marriage is invalid. His voice was quiet, but his eyes weren't. If your family sits across from a detective and describes a daughter who seemed frightened, confused, coerced, Max gets his investigation. My properties get tied up in proceedings I don't have time for. He held her gaze. That breaks our arrangement. Audrey swallowed once. So this isn't about protecting me. It's about protecting your operations. They're the same thing now. He didn't move back. You're my business, Audrey. That's not a metaphor. She was still working out what to say to that when he continued. Your father took a loan when he opened his restaurant. Silvio's voice stayed even. Through one of Max's companies. I acquired that debt this morning. Her father. Your father doesn't owe Max anything anymore. His eyes stayed on hers. He owes me. Audrey's voice came out careful and deliberate. How did you know about that loan? Only my father, Max, and I. Silvio smiled. Just slightly. She held herself very still. So? She looked at him steadily, even as her pulse had taken on a rhythm she hadn't authorized. If I make a mistake tomorrow, if I fail that performance, you'll do what Max couldn't? You'll use it against my family. Silvio reached out. His fingers touched her jaw. The lightest possible contact, the suggestion of it, tipping her face upward a fraction. His gaze moved over her face with the patience of a man who had already decided. I don't run small accounts, Audrey. I don't threaten. His voice dropped. I manage what's mine. That's all. He let his hand fall. Tomorrow night, you sit at that table like you chose this, not like someone playing the victim. His gaze stayed steady. Like a gallows. He turned back toward the desk. There's a gala next week. Max will be there. By the time you walk into that room, he won't have a single bullet left to use against you. He sat back down and picked up his pen. Now go get ready. He glanced up once, direct and final. Not like a woman who owes me, like an empress. That's what I want. Silvio was gone by 8. He came through the entrance hall in full suit, phone already in hand, moving with the efficiency of a man who had the day mapped out before it started. He paused long enough to look at her. I have business today. Talk to the chef about tomorrow's dinner. Whatever you want, just make sure it works for a family meal. His eyes moved back to his phone. I'll be back after lunch. Then he was gone, and the house closed around her. Audrey spent the first hour exploring. The Gallo estate was enormous, in the way that old money is enormous. Not showy, just inexhaustible. Corridor after corridor, room after room, each one furnished with the quiet confidence of people who had never worried about running out of space. She counted 5 staff members in the first 30 minutes without trying, a chef she could hear clattering in the kitchen, 2 suited men at the back entrance, standing with the stillness of people paid not to move. How long does this last? The thought had been circling since she woke up. How long am I supposed to stay here? She had no ID, no bank card, no phone of her own. Somewhere across the city, her apartment was sitting exactly as she'd left it. A life in suspension. She went to find the security at the main gate. The man at the door was broad, professional, and apologetic in the way of someone delivering a message he'd been given no choice about. Her chin came up. If Silvio Gallo thinks he can keep me here like I'm under house arrest, she kept her voice level, he's going to find out very quickly that he's wrong. The man's expression didn't move, neither did he. She turned back toward the house. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something sharper, cut fruit maybe. Audrey heard the knife before she saw him. He was leaning against the counter with the ease of someone who had nowhere better to be. Shirt tail out, actually no shirt at all, just bare skin, and the kind of build that made it obvious he hadn't spent the morning at a desk. A knife in one hand, an apple in the other, peeling it in long, deliberate strips. Audrey stopped in the doorway. "You were here this whole time?" Aldo glanced up. "Last time I checked, it was my house too. Problem with that, bride?" She stepped into the kitchen. Think. She needed a car, someone not under Silvio's authority. She needed... "I need to get out." She held his gaze. "My apartment. I need to pick up a few things." Aldo's knife kept moving, slow, patient. "Someone needs to take me." Her voice stayed even. "Get me out of here." He cut a slice free, held it up, considered it. Then he looked at her, top to bottom, the full deliberate circuit, and tossed the slice into his mouth. "And you thought I'd be that someone?" He chewed. "Why would I cross Silvio over your errands?" She kept her eyes on his. "I didn't take you for someone who played it safe." He cut another slice. "Wrong door. I can't help you." The knife moved again. "We're not allies, Audrey." She stood there for a moment. Then she unclenched her hand, which had closed without her noticing. "Fine." She turned toward the hall, over her shoulder. "And since this isn't your private residence, there are staff here, and me. Put a shirt on." Behind her a laugh, low and genuinely delighted. His voice followed her into the hall. "Afraid of being attracted to me, bride?" Audrey rolled her eyes. "What is it with Gallo men?" She didn't stop walking. An hour later she was in the pergola, sitting in the same chair where Silvio had watched his wedding gown burn, turning over her options and not liking any of them. The horn startled her. She turned. Aldo was at the wheel of a black Porsche convertible, top down, dressed like he'd had somewhere important to be, and decided this was more interesting. He lifted his chin. "Hey, come on! Get in, bride!" Audrey walked over and stood at the passenger door. "I thought we weren't allies." He pulled off his sunglasses and hooked them over his collar. "I've always enjoyed making Silvio's day worse." His mouth curved. "If you want to take advantage of that, get in. We'll go get your stuff." She got in. The security chief stepped forward when he saw the car. "Mr. Gallo." His voice was careful. "The lady has instructions not to leave." "Open the gate, Rick." The man's mouth closed. The gate opened. The Porsche moved through it, gravel crunching under the tires, and then they were on the main road with the wind coming in over the windshield and Audrey's hair immediately everywhere. She pulled it back with one hand and held it. Aldo accelerated without comment. "Silvio's little bird," he said after a while, eyes forward. "Out of the golden cage for the afternoon." "I'm not a bird." She turned toward the windshield. "And it's not a cage. I'm picking up some clothes and coming straight back." "Sure." He didn't sound convinced. She studied his profile. The curve at the corner of his mouth looked like Silvio's, same angle, same timing, but where Silvio's carried dismissal, Aldo's was something closer to an invitation. "I mean," Aldo glanced sideways, amused. "Did you somehow absorb Gallo through osmosis overnight? You sound like you've been running things for years." The corner of her mouth lifted, not warmly. "You Gallos really do enjoy going after easy targets." She turned back to the road. "Apparently I need to be bossy. Are you going to do this the whole drive, Aldo, or do you actually have something useful to say?" "Why not?" He looked entirely at peace with himself. "It's entertaining." He pressed the gas. The speedometer climbed fast. Audrey grabbed the door handle with both hands. "Oh my God! Please, don't kill us before we even get there!" His laugh was sudden and genuine. 20 minutes later, the car stopped in front of her building. Aldo killed the engine and got out. Audrey followed. He was already heading toward the entrance when she called after him. "You don't have to come up." Aldo glanced around. The street, the building, the distance to the corner. "And if you run for it, you know I won't." She held his gaze. "No matter how much you'd prefer that." He shrugged, came anyway. The apartment was small and clean and entirely hers. 1 bedroom, 1 living room, a kitchen that fit 2 people. Aldo stepped inside behind her and looked around slowly, interest shifting across his face. Huh. He ran a finger along the bookshelf. You really were living in a cage. Audrey rolled her eyes and went to the bedroom. She moved fast, a few changes of clothes, her spare ID, the small things that mattered. Behind her she could hear Aldo moving through the apartment, picking things up, setting them down. This place smells good. His voice came from somewhere in the living room. She came back through the doorway and stopped. He was standing just inside it, closer than she'd expected. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Aldo leaned in. Just slightly, just enough, and his head dipped toward her hair. He stayed there, not touching, just close. Same scent. His voice had dropped a register. His head tilted, listening almost. That's yours, isn't it? It's in the whole apartment. Audrey's pulse registered the proximity before she did. She kept her face still, kept everything still, but her weight had shifted backward without her deciding it would. Aldo. Her voice came out even, barely. Give me some space. Go sit in the living room. She held his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. He studied her for 1 more second, that pale blue gaze, so like his brother's and so different. Then stepped back and smiled. As you wish. 10 minutes later she came out with a small bag over her shoulder. She stopped in the doorway. Ready. Aldo pushed off the wall. All right, Cinderella, back to the cage you chose. Audrey fell into step beside him. I genuinely don't care about the jabs, you know. He winced, theatrical. That hurts. I was aiming for the heart with every single one. She was still smiling when they hit the street. The 2 men were positioned by the building entrance, and Audrey registered them half a second too late, the way you register a change in a room you've walked through 100 times. One of them stepped forward and closed a hand around her arm. Miss Palmer. His voice was flat and practiced. Mr. Gordon would like a word. She pulled. His grip held. Get off me. Hey! Aldo's voice came from 3 feet behind her. Low and completely flat. The pleasantness gone out of it entirely. Get your hand off her. The man started to turn. Aldo's fist connected with his jaw before he finished the movement. 1 punch, then a second. The man went down. The other one reached for his jacket and found himself looking at Aldo's gun before he got there. Aldo's arm was steady, his voice was steady, his eyes were not. Nobody touches a Gallo. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Go back to Gordon and tell him there is no Miss Palmer anymore. There's Audrey Gallo. His eyes stayed level. Silvio has limits. I don't. Both of them ran. Audrey stood on the sidewalk and watched them go. The gun. How fast he'd moved. She hadn't seen either coming. He opened the passenger door. In, Cinderella. She got in. Her eyes were still on him when he started the car. I figured you'd have been happy to let them take me. Would have been convenient, yeah? He pulled out of the space, easy. But you're a Gallo now. Can't let the family look bad. The road was quiet on the way back. The Porsche tore down the road with the roof open, wind whipping Audrey's hair across her mouth. Aldo was driving with 1 hand. The other rested near the gear shift, knuckles split, the skin around them swelling where he'd hit Max's man. Audrey looked at the blood, then at his face. Your hand is bleeding. Aldo's mouth curved. Worried about me, bride? She reached into her bag, pulled out a clean napkin and dropped it on the console between them. No, blood on leather is tacky. A laugh slipped out of him before he could stop it. He picked up the napkin and wrapped it around his knuckles with his teeth and 1 hand. Cold little thing, aren't you? Audrey looked out at the road. I learned fast. He laughed again, full, unguarded, the most real sound she'd heard from him. She turned to look at him. I know you don't want me here. I know you wanted Silvio out, and that position for yourself. She kept her voice easy, already decided. So why did you help me? Aldo was quiet for a moment. His jaw shifted once. Maybe I want you owing me. He glanced at her sideways. Not Silvio. Audrey faced forward. Then you wasted your trip. Her voice was even. I don't belong in your debt either. He didn't answer. She could feel his eyes on her after that, patient, calculated, and she didn't look back. The gates opened before they reached them. Audrey stepped out of the car, that laugh still somewhere in her chest, the ease of the drive still on her. She pulled her bag off the seat. At the top of the front steps, Silvio was standing. His hands were in his pockets, his face was composed, his eyes were not. She climbed the stairs beside Aldo, feeling the specific quality of Silvio's attention with every step, not his usual look. This was different, charged in a way that had been building since before the gates opened. She reached the top step. Her breath caught without her deciding it would. Silvio's hand came around her arm, firm, possessive, final, the grip of a man who had decided this conversation was happening now. He looked at his brother. His voice came exactly level. "If you're done, my wife and I have a private matter to discuss." Aldo lifted both hands, a performance of innocence, perfectly executed. "Your wife is entirely yours, brother." Silvio turned toward the house, his hand still on her arm, firm, certain, the way a door closes when there's no wind and no resistance. Audrey felt the pressure of it with every step. Her pulse was ahead of her again, and she let it lead. The study door closed behind her. The anger was there. His jaw flexed once. His posture had sharpened. Not calm, not even close. But underneath it, unreadable, still making up his mind about her. He crossed to her. "I told you not to leave." His voice came low, clipped. "And you got into Aldo's car." Audrey held her ground for 2 steps. Then her back hit the wall. He kept coming. His hands came up, palms flat against the wall on either side of her head, and the room got very small. "Don't test me, Audrey." His eyes stayed on hers. "You won't like how that ends." Her chin came up. "If you think a contract means you own me, you're wrong. You can't keep me locked in here." She held his gaze. "I had nothing here, no ID, no money, nothing. I needed to go to my apartment, and your men wouldn't let me out the door." Silvio's expression didn't shift. His eyes stayed on her. "I'm not locking you in," he said. "I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference." His eyes moved over her face. "You don't know what's outside those gates. And I'm not just talking about Max Gordon." A short breath left her. Dry, humorless. "You're not worried about me?" Her chin stayed up. "You're worried about your reputation and losing your shot at an heir." She met his gaze without blinking. "For the record, that's not in our deal. My bedroom isn't part of it. I won't sleep with you." Silvio's eyebrows lifted, slowly. He looked almost interested. "Anything happens to a gallows wife, that lands on me." He didn't move back. "So you'll do what I tell you." Then he leaned in, slow, deliberate. His face came down toward hers until his lips were a breath away from hers, close enough to touch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. Not yet. He stayed there, a few seconds, maybe more, like he was going to kiss her. He didn't. "And who said I wanted to sleep with you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not my type." She swallowed, kept her face still, kept everything still. Silvio's thumb traced her cheek once, barely there. "I need a wife for a few months while I sort some things out." Each word came quiet, deliberate. "When I want an heir, that'll be with a woman I actually love." He held the distance for one more second. "Not an arrangement." Silence held. His control didn't crack. Then he pulled back, straightened. His eyes settled on her. Steady, done. Audrey breathed. She would not let him see it land. She kept her expression flat, her eyes level, refused to let it show. "Good." She kept her voice even. "Glad we're on the same page." She let the silence stretch 1 second. "And for what it's worth, I only left to pick up my things. I can't spend all day in heels and cocktail dresses. That's all it was." Silvio looked at her. Then his gaze moved down, slow, impersonal, and came back up. "You don't wear jeans in this house." His voice was back to normal. Even. Final. He dropped his arms and stepped back. "I left a dress in your room for tomorrow night. Make it a good evening for the family." He moved toward the desk and picked up a folder. "Dinner matters in this house. 8 o'clock every night." His eyes dropped to the page. Starting tonight. And Audrey. He didn't look up. Stay away from Aldo. She walked out with a smile she hadn't earned, the kind you wear when you refuse to give someone the satisfaction. Down the hall, up the stairs, door open, door closed. The bag was still on the bed where she'd dropped it. She unzipped it and started pulling things out. The spare clothes, the ID, the small things she'd crossed the city for. And somewhere around the third item, her hands stopped cooperating and she just threw it. Then the next one. Then the one after that, clothes hitting the mattress with far less impact than she needed. Ah! It came out before she could stop it. Frustration, and underneath it, a feeling she wasn't ready to name. She stood in the middle of the room, breathing. Silvio Gallo. To the room, to the walls, to the general injustice of the last 20 minutes. You are the most infuriating person I have ever met. Her eyes caught on the slit of the black dress. Deep, deliberate, the kind that made a statement. Not your type, huh, Silvio? A quiet smile crossed her face. We'll see about that. The house was already in motion when Audrey came downstairs. Staff was moving through the corridors with the brisk efficiency of people who'd been given a deadline. A braising smell drifted from the kitchen, and someone had arranged flowers on the hall table, white, formal, the kind chosen to impress. Silvio and Aldo were both gone. She was already dressed, jeans, cream-knit sweater, hair loose, and she'd done it on purpose. She went down to deal with dinner. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic and a braise that had been going for hours. The chef, a compact, serious man named Giorgio, was standing at the stove like he owned it. On the counter beside him lay a handwritten card. Audrey picked it up. Traditional menu, per Mr. Gallo. She read through it, set it back down. Giorgio. He looked up from the stove, expression polite and non-committal. I'd like to change this. But, Mrs. Gallo, Mr. Gallo said, my husband left me in charge of dinner. She kept her tone easy, factual. My family is coming. I know what they like. She crossed to the counter and leaned against it, facing him. Braised short ribs, roasted vegetables, good bread. Simple, proper. Nothing that makes my parents feel like they're being tested. Giorgio studied her for a moment. The short ribs need 4 hours. Then we'd better start now. She held his gaze. I'll get out of your way once we've sorted the menu. He relented. Braised short ribs. He set down his spoon. I'll need to adjust the order. Thank you, Giorgio. She was almost at the door when he spoke without turning. Your mother, any dietary restrictions? Audrey stopped. I'll send you a list. He nodded once. She left him to it. Classic. Hands you the wheel, forgets to give you the keys. Michael found her in the sitting room an hour later. She'd been watching the garden through the tall windows, running through what she was going to say to her parents, how she was going to explain, well, all of it. There wasn't a clean version. Mrs. Gallo. Michael held out a flat package. From Silvio. She took it, pulled the paper back to find a phone. New, slim, already charged. New line. Michael tucked the paper under his arm. He'd prefer you didn't use your old one. Audrey turned it over in her hands. She should probably find this controlling. She did, actually. She also hadn't had a working phone since the wedding. Well, she slipped it into her pocket. Better than nothing. I can finally reach people. The corner of Michael's mouth moved. Silvio's trying to protect you, Mrs. Gallo. He came to stand beside her at the window. The city knows. Word travels fast in Providence. Who he married, where she came from, what it means. There are people paying attention to you right now who have nothing good in mind. He paused. It won't always feel this confined. Audrey looked at the garden. You've said you worked for this family for a long time, right? Michael's eyes went to the window. 25 years. Does it ever get easier? She wasn't sure what she was asking exactly. Living inside all this. Michael considered the question. His eyes stayed on the garden a moment. You stopped noticing the walls. When you trust the person who built them. She looked at him for a moment, then back at the garden. Trust. The word sat there. She wasn't sure she'd trust Silvio Gallo with a houseplant, let alone herself. But she understood distantly what Michael was pointing at. By 6 o'clock her hands weren't quite steady. She noticed it when she pressed both palms flat on the dresser and looked at herself. You survived yesterday, she told herself. You can survive dinner. She went upstairs to get dressed. The dress Silvio had left was still hanging on the closet door. Elegant, tasteful, the kind of dress that looked good in photos and said nothing. She glanced at it, looked away, turned on the shower. "Mrs. Gallo." The housekeeper's voice came carefully from the other side of the door. "A package arrived for you." Audrey came out wrapped in a towel, opened the door. The box on the tray was large, wrapped in elegant deep red paper, tied with a black ribbon. She brought it to the bed and opened it. The dress inside was emerald green, the color of deep water, of a forest at night. The neckline was low, the fabric was satin that caught the light with every movement, and a slit up the side that didn't apologize for itself. She found the card tucked inside the tissue paper. "Own that table like a queen, Audrey. This color suits your skin and your eyes perfectly. And Silvio's temper even better." Beneath it, a single letter. A. Written like it belonged on a contract. Audrey read it twice. Then she sat there, holding it. "Aldo is opening a door," she thought. "The question is, what's on the other side?" She turned the card over. His brother's anger, or his own game? The second line pulled at her. Silvio's temper even better. She thought about the previous night, the study, the wall, the distance between their mouths that had felt smaller than it actually was. His voice when he'd said, "Not your type." How hard she'd worked to keep her face still. She pressed her fingers to the satin without meaning to, cool under her fingertips, a color that didn't ask permission. Whatever this was, it wasn't fear. She stood up and stepped into it. The mirror didn't lie. The emerald cut along her figure with a precision that had nothing to do with chance. Someone had chosen this deliberately, knowing exactly what it would do. She applied her lipstick, then reached for the diamond earrings Silvio had left on the dresser the night before. She held one up for a second. Then she put it in. Might as well go all the way. She took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her didn't look anything like a secretary, didn't look like a runaway bride, didn't look like a woman paying a debt. She looked like trouble. Good, she thought. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Her heart was going faster than she'd given it permission to. She breathed through it, one slow breath, chin up, and then she stepped forward. The sound of her heels on the marble carried down through the quiet of the house, each step deliberate, measured, the kind of sound that gets there before you do. At the bottom of the staircase, Aldo was leaning against the wall with a glass in one hand, entirely at ease. He heard her before he saw her. His head came up, tracking the sound. Then he saw her. The glass lowered. The smirk he usually wore, that permanent, slightly contemptuous curl of amusement, faltered, just for a second. His gaze moved over her, from her hair down, pausing at each place where the green satin met her skin, and what came back in its place was different. "Holy—" He exhaled the word. His voice had gone somewhere lower than usual. "I knew the color would suit you, Audrey." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't expect you to look like a literal war crime." Audrey reached the bottom of the stairs. Aldo stepped toward her, close enough to keep his next words between them. "My brother's in there waiting for a wife to perform her part." His eyes held that particular gleam. "You're walking in with a demolition." He lifted his glass. "Good luck, Cinderella." She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she walked past him. The satin brushed his jacket as she passed. She did not look back. At the dining room door, she stopped. Inside, Michael was standing at Silvio's shoulder, speaking quietly. The table was set immaculately. Crystal, candles, white linen pressed flat. Silvio was sitting at the head of it. He heard the door and turned. He went completely still. The word he'd been forming for Michael left unfinished in his mouth. Then his expression closed, the way a door closes, and he rose. Audrey was walking toward him. She felt every step. He was watching her the entire time, not blinking. His throat moved. Once, quickly. She saw it and filed it away before her expression could react. His gaze was tracking from her eyes to her mouth to the neckline of the dress, lingering there a second longer than indifferent. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles going white. She stopped across from him. "That's not the dress I left in your room." His voice came out rough, lower than she'd ever heard it. Audrey met his eyes. "You're right." Her voice came out quiet but pointed. "I didn't like that one." She tilted her head slightly. "Does this one not suit me?" Aldo appeared in the doorway behind her, and she heard the sound of a man who was trying very hard not to laugh. "I think it suits her perfectly, brother." He came to stand at the side of the table, swirling his glass. Matches her eyes, even. Silvio looked at him. The look lasted 2 seconds. It said everything that needed saying. Silvio opened his mouth. The front doorbell rang. The room went still. Then Silvio exhaled, slow, deliberate, and crossed to her in 2 steps. His hand came to the small of her back. Not a suggestion. The pressure of his fingers through the satin found her skin with a certainty that made her spine straighten. He bent his head to her ear. "Smile, Audrey." His breath was warm against her neck, his voice barely above a murmur. "Showtime." His fingers pressed once, deliberate, certain. His lips were still close to her ear. "After dinner, you and I are going to have a very private conversation about that dress." Her family was at the door. She smiled. Not for her family, not for the room, for herself. "You wanted an empress, Silvio Gallo. Here she comes." Audrey slipped free from Silvio's tightening hand and hurried toward the door just as her parents stepped inside. Arthur Palmer entered first, but instead of admiring the marble entrance hall, his eyes went straight to the suited men standing near the door. He noticed them immediately, counted them, almost. Audrey knew that look. Her father might own a small restaurant, but he knew how to read a room, and this one was making him uneasy. Then Martha saw her. "Audrey!" She rushed forward with a burst of relief and wrapped both arms around her daughter. Audrey held her tightly for a second, breathing in the familiar scent of home, before her mother leaned close and whispered into her ear, "Sweetheart, are you okay? This place is like a fortress. Are they keeping you here by force?" Audrey pulled back just enough to answer under her breath. "Don't worry, Mom. No one is keeping me here by force." Martha searched her face, clearly unconvinced, but before she could ask anything else, Silvio stepped toward them. He extended his hand to Arthur. "Good evening, Mr. Palmer. I'm Silvio Gallo." Arthur took the hand with a neutral expression. "I know who you are." Silvio didn't so much as blink. He turned to Martha instead, took her hand, and brushed a polite kiss across her knuckles. "Mrs. Palmer, I'm very glad you came." Then his hand returned to Audrey's waist. Silvio put on the flawless host's mask so smoothly that Audrey almost hated him for it. A minute ago, he had looked ready to set the room on fire over a green dress. Now he was standing beside her, calm, polished, and perfectly in control, his fingers tightening slightly at her waist as he stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Palmer." He gestured toward the dining room. "It's an honor to welcome you into our home." At that moment, Aldo appeared just behind them, one hand in his pocket, a champagne glass in the other. He raised it lazily in greeting. "Our bride's family. Welcome." Audrey glanced toward her parents. "That's Aldo, Silvio's twin." Martha looked from one brother to the other and gave a polite little smile. "Oh, yes, I can see it. They do look alike." Audrey murmured, just loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Actually, Mom, they don't look alike at all." Aldo's mouth curved. Silvio's hand tightened once more at her waist. 10 minutes later, everyone was seated at the table. Dinner had just been served when Arthur cleared his throat and looked directly at Silvio. "Mr. Gallo, I'll be honest. I'm curious how you met my daughter and ended up marrying her this quickly." Silvio set down his wine glass. His hand came to rest on Audrey's bare shoulder, easy, deliberate, the gesture of a man making a point to an audience. "Do you believe in love at first sight, Mr. Palmer?" He let the question sit for a moment, long enough to make it look like he was actually deciding. "I'm not sure I did. Until Audrey." Arthur set his glass down without drinking from it. His eyes stayed on Silvio. He turned his face toward her. The warmth in it was flawless. "And I believe," he added, "that she felt the same. Didn't you, darling?" Audrey managed a smile. Barely. Aldo's smile sharpened. "And she was already wearing a wedding dress," he added. "Which was helpful. Silvio saw a bride. Audrey saw an escape route. All we had to do was replace Max with Silvio. I call that efficiency." The silence around the table deepened at once. Silvio didn't move. For exactly 1 second, he was very still. The kind of stillness that came before a decision. Then he looked at his brother. His voice was cold but controlled. "My brother enjoys describing romance as if it were an operational procedure. But when Audrey walked into that church and made a decision, I respected it. I wasn't going to leave her in the hands of a man like Max Gordon. Martha jumped in with nervous brightness. Oh, so everything was just very spontaneous. Audrey was always like that. Whenever we played hide and seek, she always found the most impossible places to hide. Aldo's gaze moved to Audrey's emerald dress. He gave her a slow wink. Well, Mrs. Palmer, this time she picked a fortress, and the creature who found her was a dragon, though I have to say, this new green hiding place is much more strategic than a white wedding dress. Under the table, Silvio found Audrey's hand and took it. His thumb was moving across her palm, slow, possessive. Dragons don't like sharing their treasure. Audrey is in safe hands now. Audrey didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her shoulders shimmering in the emerald satin. You're right, Silvio. Her voice came out soft and perfectly innocent. She kept her eyes on Martha. She could feel Silvio's hand tighten a fraction under the table before she even finished the sentence. I'm in safe hands, especially considering the complicated clasps on the back of this dress. Silvio's thumb stopped dead, his gaze hardened. Audrey kept her hand in his, still under the table. Silvio is wonderful, so attentive, a true gentleman. He notices everything. He treats me like a princess. We're still figuring each other out, but I feel truly safe with him. Martha's worry softened. Oh, darling, you look so beautiful, and this color suits you perfectly. Aldo let out a sharp, knowing laugh. Across the table, his eyes found hers for exactly 1 second. Yes, Mom. Her smile stayed perfectly innocent, her eyes still on her mother. I love the dress too, but it took me 15 minutes to put on. There are nearly 20 clasps in the back, like a princess gown. It's almost impossible to dress yourself in it. Silvio's jaw went rigid. His hand found hers under the table and squeezed it, hard. Across the table, Arthur had been watching him the entire time. Not Martha, not Audrey. Silvio. Then he released her hand. He picked up his wineglass and turned to Arthur and Martha, his voice tight but controlled. I hope you're enjoying the meal. Let's move on to dessert. By the time Arthur and Martha Palmer left the Gallo estate, Audrey's smile had become something she was holding with the last of her strength. Her mother hugged her at the door one more time, tighter than before, and brought her mouth close to Audrey's ear. Come to me tomorrow, Martha whispered. Alone, if you can. I want you to tell me everything yourself, because something about this doesn't feel right. Audrey closed her eyes for half a second. She wanted to say that everything was fine, wanted to make her mother believe the emerald dress, the ring, the marble floors, the men in dark suits, and Silvio Gallo's hand at her waist were all parts of a story that made sense. But the lie would not come cleanly. I'll call you tomorrow, she whispered instead. Martha pulled back and searched her face with the helpless concentration of a mother trying to read the truth through lipstick and candlelight. Arthur stood beside her, quiet as always, his worry in the set of his shoulders, unspoken. When the door finally closed behind them, the whole entrance hall seemed to exhale. Audrey stayed where she was for a moment, still facing the door, her mother's words sitting under her skin. Then she turned. Silvio and Aldo were standing behind her in their dark suits, both watching her. The dinner had ended at the table, but neither of them looked finished. Aldo's amusement had sharpened, the way it always did when he'd gotten exactly what he'd come for. Silvio's gaze was quieter, colder, and fixed on her with a restraint that made Audrey suddenly aware of every small clasp running down the back of her dress. She lifted her chin, because it was either that or let them see how exhausted she was, forcing lightness into her voice. Well, I think that went well. Aldo's mouth curved around the edge of his champagne glass. For this house, practically wholesome. Silvio did not smile. Audrey looked from one brother to the other, then stepped back before either of them could turn the moment into another battlefield. Good night, then. She turned toward the stairs and walked up faster than elegance allowed, feeling Aldo's amused gaze at her back and Silvio's silence following her more closely than footsteps. In her room, she closed the door and stood still until the sound of her own breathing came back to her. The dress suddenly felt too tight. Not the satin itself, but the whole evening seemed caught in it. Her mother's fear, her father's questions, Aldo's laugh, Silvio's hand under the table, the way his thumb had stopped dead when she whispered about the clasps. Audrey crossed to the mirror and turned slightly, reaching behind her for the first clasp. Her fingers found satin, then the delicate line of metal, then slipped. She tried again. The clasp held. A frustrated breath left her lips. "Beautiful, expensive, and impossible to get out of without help," she murmured. The knock came once, not loud, not polite either. Audrey's eyes lifted to the mirror. She did not need to ask who it was. "Come in." Silvio stepped inside without his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, the polished host from dinner gone. What was left was quieter and far more dangerous. The blue in his eyes was carrying a heat Audrey felt before he said a word, and the veins along his forearms stood out as his hands flexed once at his sides. His gaze went first to her face in the mirror, and something low in Audrey's stomach caught fire before his eyes dropped to the hand trapped behind her back, then to the long line of tiny clasps running down the emerald satin. Audrey lowered her arms slowly. Silvio closed the door behind him with controlled care. "You sound like you're asking for help." Her eyes stayed on the mirror. "I'm not." His eyes stayed on hers in the reflection. "No." His voice was low, almost even. "You're waiting." The words touched the back of her neck before he did. Audrey's fingers curled against the edge of the vanity. "If you came here to be angry about the dress, you're late. Dinner already ended." Silvio moved closer, not rushing, not giving her the mercy of distance either. "Dinner ended," he murmured. "My anger didn't." Her pulse shifted. He stopped behind her, close enough that the heat of him reached through the air before his hands did. For a moment he did not touch the dress. He only looked at her in the mirror, at the flush she could feel rising along her throat, at the way she was holding herself too still. "You wore Aldo's provocation at my table." Her chin stayed up. "I wore a dress." His mouth barely moved. "No, you wore a challenge." His fingers lifted then, brushing her loose hair over one shoulder. The touch was careful, almost restrained, which somehow made it worse. His knuckles grazed the side of her neck for less than a second, but her body reacted as if he had pressed his mouth there. She hated that he saw it. His fingertips found the first clasp. A small metallic click opened between them. "You went out with him." The dress loosened by a breath at the top of her spine. Another click. "You came back with him." Audrey's shoulders drew in, not away from him exactly, but as if her body could not decide whether it wanted distance or more of the heat gathering behind her. Another click. "You let him put his color on you." His fingers moved lower, the pads of them barely touching skin where the satin parted. It was not enough to be a caress. It was worse than that. It was almost nothing, and Audrey felt every inch of it. Another click. "You let him sit at my table and watch me look at you." Audrey swallowed. Her eyes found his in the mirror. "You told me I wasn't your type." Silvio's hand stopped. For the first time since he entered the room, his control did not look effortless. The silence stretched. She didn't look away. "Then why are you touching me? Like this is costing you?" Silvio did not answer. Not at first. His gaze held hers in the mirror, dark blue and unreadable, while the silence between them stretched so tightly that Audrey felt it in her ribs. Then his finger moved again, not to open the next clasp, but to trace the newly exposed line of skin where the satin had parted. Slowly, barely. A touch so light it should not have felt like possession. Audrey's breath caught before she could stop it, and Silvio saw that too. His mouth came closer to her ear, his voice dropping until it was almost part of the heat against her neck. "Because, Audrey," he murmured, "breaking something is easy." His finger drifted another inch along her spine, patient enough to be cruel. "Taming? It takes patience." Silvio opened one more clasp. The final sound was small, almost delicate, and then the emerald satin gave way. Audrey gasped as the dress slipped from her body and fell in a soft rush to the floor. Her hands flew to her chest, holding the front of herself covered as her lips parted and her breath broke unevenly in the mirror. Silvio did not step back. His eyes held hers in the glass while one finger traced slowly from the curve of her shoulder down to the hands she had pressed against herself, the almost touch burning where it passed. Audrey's knees felt suddenly unreliable. He lowered his head to her ear, his breath warm against the skin just below it. "Good night, Audrey," he whispered to her neck. "Dream of all the things I didn't do." Then his hand dropped away. The room felt colder the second he stopped touching her. Silvio turned and walked to the door without looking back. Audrey stood frozen in front of the mirror, one hand still pressed to her chest, the other trembling against the edge of the vanity, her whole body burning from the restraint he had left behind. The door closed softly. Only then did she breathe. Audrey went to bed, convinced exhaustion would take pity on her, but the moment the house fell into silence, the memory of Silvio followed her under the sheets. The room was dark, the fabric cool against her skin, and she turned from one side to the other with the stubborn determination of a woman trying to outrun her own body. The harder she tried to push the evening away, the sharper it returned. Silvio without his jacket, the veins along his forearms, the careful cruelty of those fingers opening every clasp, the heat of his breath at her neck, the way he had touched almost nothing and still left her burning everywhere. She closed her eyes, and the mirror came back, the emerald dress slipping to the floor. Her hands flying to cover herself, Silvio's blue eyes holding hers without taking what he easily could have taken, his voice at her ear, low and impossible to forget. "Dream of all the things I didn't do." A broken breath slipped out of her. "Stop," she whispered into the dark. But her body did not obey her pride. Her hand moved over the sheet first, then over herself, hesitant and angry, as if she were trying to erase the place where Silvio's almost touch had stayed by replacing it with her own. It should have calmed her. It should have reminded her that her body still belonged to her, that no man, no ring, no dangerous voice at her ear had the right to live under her skin this way. Instead, the memory sharpened, his mouth near her neck, his hand stopping when she expected it to continue, his control leaving her more undone than any kiss could have. Audrey's fingers twisted into the sheet, and her breathing changed before she could pretend it had not. Her body arched into a need she had no intention of naming, and the shock of it made her eyes fly open. She pulled her hand away as if it had betrayed her. "What am I doing?" The words came out breathless and angry. She sat up, one hand pressed to her chest, her heart racing beneath her palm. Nothing had happened. Not really. The door was still closed, the room was still dark, and Silvio was nowhere near her, except she had wanted him to be. That was the part that frightened her. Audrey sat on the edge of the bed until her breathing slowed, refusing to look toward the door, and hating herself because some part of her had already imagined him on the other side of it. "Absolutely not," she muttered. But when she lay down again, sleep stayed far away for a very long time. The next morning, Audrey reached for her jeans out of habit. Her fingers brushed the denim, then stopped. Yesterday, those jeans had felt like a declaration, comfort, defiance, a way of reminding herself that the Gallo house did not get to decide how she entered a room. Her eyes moved to the dresses, morning light spilled across the floor, and for once the house felt less like stone. Audrey hated how quickly she noticed that. Hated even more that she cared what she looked like before she could admit who she was dressing for. She pulled out a black sleeveless dress. It was simple, nothing like the emerald provocation Aldo had sent the night before, but once she slipped it on, the mirror gave her back a woman who looked more awake than she felt. Her hand reached for the lipstick, then paused halfway to her mouth. "Why are you trying to look beautiful, Audrey?" Her reflection had no answer. She put on a light coat anyway, then snapped the cap back on. "Get him out of your head." By the time she went downstairs, she knew she had already failed. When Audrey came downstairs, Silvio was not at the breakfast table. Only Michael stood near the sideboard, calm as ever, and Aldo sat with one arm draped over the back of his chair, watching her over his coffee cup with a look that said he had noticed the dress, the lipstick, and the exact second her face changed when she realized Silvio was absent. Audrey stopped near the table. "Where is Silvio?" Michael's voice came before Aldo could enjoy himself. "Mr. Gallo left early this morning for business. He'll be gone for 3 days. Audrey looked down at the table, pretending to consider the coffee service, while the small, ridiculous drop in her chest settled into a place she could hide. 3 days, she repeated, as if the number had no weight at all. Aldo's mouth curved. Oh, you sound disappointed, sister-in-law. No, Aldo. I sound like I asked a practical question. You always do, he returned smoothly. It's one of your better lies. Audrey turned away from him before the conversation could become the kind of game he enjoyed. I assume I'm allowed to leave the house? Michael did not look surprised. Where would you like to go? My mother's. I want to see her. Aldo set his cup down with lazy interest. How wholesome. Audrey did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Michael gave a small nod. I'll arrange the car. Thank you. She could feel Aldo's eyes on her as she walked away, and for the first time that morning she was grateful Silvio was gone. Then she hated that his absence had been the reason she wanted to leave. Her mother opened the door before the driver had fully pulled away from the curb. Martha looked as if she had been waiting by the window, and the moment Audrey stepped inside, she pulled her into the kitchen, sat her down, and put the kettle on with the brisk urgency of a woman who believed tea could at least hold panic in a cup. The old wooden table was the same. So was the sharp lemon cleaner, the chipped blue mug, and her mother's hand covering hers every few minutes, as if she needed to make sure Audrey was still real. Martha looked at her over the rim of her teacup. Is he good to you? Audrey's hands tightened around her own cup. She thought of Silvio's hand at her waist in front of her parents, the way his voice had gone rough in the study, the clasp that had opened between them like a question neither of them had answered. It's complicated. Martha waited. No, he hasn't hurt me. No, I'm not locked in a room. Audrey looked down at the tea, watching the pale steam twist between them. And no, I can't explain everything yet. Her mother's expression said she understood more than Audrey had given her. For a while the kitchen held only the small sounds of the kettle settling, the street beyond the window, Martha's thumb moving once over Audrey's hand. Then her mother looked at her again with the long, careful attention of a woman who had been reading her daughter's face since birth. And this man, Audrey, Silvio. Her voice softened around his name. What is he to you? Audrey looked down at her cup. 100 safer answers passed through her mind. A deal. A shield. A storm. Any one of them would have been easier. Any one of them would have made more sense. She could have said them and watched her mother's fear settle into something ordinary. Then the wrong truth came out before she could stop it. I love him. The kitchen went quiet. Audrey lifted her head, startled by the sound of her own voice. She only meant to make her mother believe she was safe, but the words waiting in her throat carried something dangerously close to truth, too raw to call love yet too strong to dismiss as nothing. Martha's face softened and broke at once. Oh, sweetheart, Audrey's fingers tightened around the cup. I don't know what that means yet. Martha reached across the table and closed both hands around hers. Then don't let anyone else decide what it means for you. Audrey carried that sentence back to the estate with her. By afternoon, the house felt too quiet. Audrey returned from her mother's with more questions than comfort, and the moment she stepped back into the Gallo estate, she found herself listening for a voice she had no business missing. No low command from the hall, no shift in the air before Silvio entered a room, no blue eyes finding her before she had time to prepare herself. Only polished silence. She walked toward the shore instead of sitting inside with it. The sand was cool beneath her shoes, the water restless under the pale afternoon light. Audrey sat near the edge of the dunes and wrapped her arms loosely around her knees, letting the wind move through her loose hair until the house behind her felt farther away. For a while, she was alone. Then she heard footsteps in the sand. Aldo came toward her in white linen, the sleeves loose at his wrists, the wind moving through his hair. No champagne glass, no dark suit, no lazy doorway to lean against. Just Aldo in the open air, sun on his face, looking unfairly handsome for a man who made trouble seem like a hobby. Audrey looked back at the water. Do you follow everyone, or only women your brother married by accident? Aldo dropped down beside her without asking, leaving enough space to pretend he had manners. Only the interesting accidents? She stayed where she was. The waves were filling the silence between them, and maybe that was why Audrey finally asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the funeral. "What happened to your mother?" Aldo's expression changed so slightly that someone else might have missed it. Audrey did not. He kept his eyes on the water. "She died giving birth to us." Audrey's breath caught softly, the image forming before she could stop it. 2 newborn boys, a mother they would never know, and a grief old enough to have shaped both of them. I'm so sorry." His jaw tightened once. "Don't be. We never knew her." The words came out too clean, too practiced, as if he had been using them for years to keep the loss from finding him. "That doesn't mean it didn't matter." He had no joke ready for that. "I came first," Aldo said after a moment, his voice lower now. Then Silvio. His eyes stayed on the water. There was a rupture, too much blood, then a clot. By the time Silvio was born, they were already losing her. Audrey went still. The words reached her slowly, each one pulling colder through her chest. "Oh my God," she whispered. Aldo finally looked at her. "What?" Audrey's eyes stayed on the water, but she was no longer seeing it. Silvio. Had he grown up knowing that? Had he carried it under every controlled breath, every locked door, every room he ruled, because he had learned too early that loss arrived when control failed? No wonder he held the world like it might break if he loosened his hand. "Audrey!" Aldo's voice brought her back. The wind had pulled a strand of hair across her face. Before she could push it away, Aldo lifted his hand and moved it gently from her cheek, his fingertip barely grazing her skin. Audrey turned to him too quickly. For a few seconds they only looked at each other. For once, the old mask was not there waiting for him. Only Aldo, closer than he had been, with the sea behind him and something almost unguarded in his eyes. Audrey's voice came softer than she expected. "That must have been terrible for both of you, Aldo. You and Silvio." A bitter smile touched the corner of his mouth, but his eyes stayed on hers. "It was 35 years ago. We learned to live with it." Audrey watched him for another second, still feeling the ghost of his fingertip near her cheek. "I thought you hated me." The corner of his mouth moved, less cruelty in it than usual. "Hate is a strong emotion." Audrey looked at the space between them then, small enough now to be dangerous, quiet enough to be misunderstood. She turned fully toward him, her voice gentle but clear. "I'm Silvio's wife." Aldo's eyes held hers. "I noticed." Her voice dropped quieter. "This may be an arrangement, but I'm loyal to him." For once, Aldo did not laugh. He studied her with a stillness that felt more honest than his smile ever had. Then he looked back at the water. "Careful, Audrey?" She held his gaze. "With what?" His voice came low, almost too soft under the sound of the waves. "Gallus have a habit of destroying the loyal ones first." Dinner that evening held a flatter, stranger silence than the night before. Silvio's empty chair sat at the head of the table like a decision no one had explained. She had not expected it to bother her. Michael remained near the sideboard with his usual quiet composure, and Aldo, for once, did not seem interested in turning the room into his private entertainment. He ate little, drank slowly, and was keeping his eyes away from Audrey just long enough for her to notice that he was choosing not to look. By the time the second course arrived, Audrey had had enough of the quiet. "I can't sit in this house all day doing nothing," she told Michael, setting her fork down with more control than she felt. Michael turned toward her immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Gallo. I can arrange riding in the morning, shopping in town, or lunch at one of the private clubs the family belongs to. With security, naturally." Audrey looked at him, the misunderstanding so complete she almost laughed. "No, not riding, not shopping, not lunch at a club where everyone pretends not to stare at me. I want to work. Useful work. Work that doesn't involve waiting for permission." Across the table, Aldo finally came back to life. A low laugh left him as he leaned into his chair, his eyes lifting to her with that familiar, dangerous amusement. "So, the little secretary wants a career. She bites harder when Silvio isn't here." Audrey turned her head slowly and gave him the kind of look she usually reserved for locked doors and men who mistook patience for weakness. "You just keep putting your fingers too close, Aldo." That seemed to please him more than it should have, so she looked back to Michael before he could turn the exchange into another game. Michael considered her request with the careful seriousness he brought to everything in the Gallo world. The family has several legitimate businesses under Gallo Harbor Group: shipping, logistics, waterfront properties, hospitality, private venues, and event operations. Her voice softened, but not enough to lose its edge. "I am not built to sit upstairs and wait for someone to decide what I'm allowed to do next." Michael gave a small nod. Gallo Harbor Group has a private events and client relations division, charity dinners, investor receptions, club openings, waterfront launches, visible work, not operational. Aldo's smile sharpened. "Put her there. She knows how to make a table dangerous. Give her candles and a guest list." Audrey narrowed her eyes at him. "Was that supposed to insult me?" "It was supposed to be accurate." Michael, wisely ignoring the way they were looking at each other, kept his eyes on Audrey. The title would be Special Projects Liaison, Private Events and Client Relations. Audrey let the title settle for a second. It was not charity. It was not shopping. It had weight, real weight. "I can work with that." Michael hesitated. "I should inform Mr. Gallo first." Audrey's answer came before the hesitation could turn into permission. "No." She held Michael's gaze. "Silvio may say no because he's not here to control the conditions himself. If you tell him first, this becomes a permission issue. If I go tomorrow, it becomes a fact." Aldo leaned forward slightly. "Careful, Audrey. Facts are how wars start in this family." "Then Silvio can call me when he lands." She lifted her glass. "I have a new phone now." For several seconds Michael said nothing, then he inclined his head with the faintest trace of surrender. "I will accompany you in the morning." Aldo's mouth curved. "I'll be at the main office tomorrow as well." Audrey looked at him despite herself. "How unfortunate for both of us." The next morning, the Gallo Empire did not look like a dark cellar or a back room full of smoke and whispered threats. It looked like a tower of glass and steel near the water, polished enough to make power look respectable. She had expected it to feel like a threat. It didn't. That was almost worse. Gallo Harbor Group. The silver letters behind the reception desk read clean and modern. Michael was walking beside Audrey across the lobby, while Aldo was moving a few steps ahead, completely at ease in the building, as if every polished surface and every lowered voice belonged to him by birth. Employees glanced at Audrey, then away just as quickly. Michael leaned slightly toward her. "Everyone knows who you are, Mrs. Gallo. You cannot walk in as an assistant, not here. Your title has to mean something." Audrey was watching a woman at the reception desk lower her eyes before Michael even finished speaking. "Apparently it already does." Aldo turned back. "Put her in events, Michael. She has the right temperament." "For events?" Audrey asked. "For controlled disasters." Michael ignored him with practiced skill. "Events and client relations would allow you to work publicly without exposing you to business areas Silvio would prefer to keep separate." "Because he trusts me so much," Audrey murmured. Michael's answer was quiet enough not to carry beyond her. "Because he does not trust anyone around you." Not her. Everyone around her. The difference landed harder than she expected. Aldo pressed the elevator button before the pause could settle. "The events floor is convenient, near my office." Audrey's smile remained polite. "Seeing you at home wasn't enough." Some people are lucky twice. The elevator doors opened. Michael stepped forward, but Aldo lifted one hand. "No need." His eyes moved to Audrey. "I'll show her." Michael's gaze went to Audrey, asking the question without speaking it. Audrey looked at Aldo, at the open elevator, then back at Michael. She didn't love the idea of being alone with Aldo, but she liked appearing afraid of it even less. Her pulse picked up exactly once. "I'll be fine." Aldo's smile deepened as she stepped in. The doors began to close. Audrey looked at him from the opposite side of the polished metal box. "For the record, this is a professional visit. Aldo leaned back against the wall, all white shirt, pale eyes, and trouble pretending to be patience. His gaze was moving over her face just long enough to make it matter. Very professional. Her throat moved around the silence. The space between them was tightening with every flaw. Breathing became noticeable. Audrey kept her eyes forward. She had not escaped the Gallo games. She had simply moved them to a higher floor. For the next 3 days, Audrey learned that the Gallo world looked cleaner in daylight than it had any right to. Gallo Harbour Group had glass walls, polite receptionists, conference rooms with water views, and employees who lowered their voices the moment she walked past. No one said Mafia wife. No one had to. The title was moving ahead of her anyway, opening doors, stiffening backs, turning simple introductions into careful little performances. The work, however, she did not hate. The private events and client relations department was preparing for the Harbour Foundation Gala, an annual charity event that had clearly been designed to impress people who were already difficult to impress. The old plan was expensive, polished, and lifeless. Black tablecloths, silent auction, speeches, donors seated by status. Arranged so carefully that no one had to feel anything. Audrey listened through the first meeting, let the department head explain the tradition, the donor expectations, the guest list, the press angles. Then she looked at the board covered in mock-ups and felt the same irritation she had felt in the Gallo kitchen when Silvio's menu had been handed to her like law. She kept her voice careful. This is beautiful, but it does not tell anyone why they should care. 3 people looked at her, as if the new Mrs. Gallo had just touched the wrong fork. Audrey did not apologize. If you want people to donate, don't make them admire the room, make them feel responsible for what happens outside it. She moved closer to the board, pointing at the event title. The harbour built this city, so make the night about the families behind it. Workers' children, emergency care, women who kept households alive while men built empires and called it legacy. The room went quiet, not hostile, listening. By the end of the 2nd day, the black tablecloths were gone. By the 3rd, the events team had worked through the changes she'd proposed. A story-driven program. Donor speeches moved later, a short film about local families, a scholarship fund for daughters of harbour workers. She did not know, when she said it, why the idea of daughters mattered so much. She only knew the room started listening when she stopped asking permission to speak. Michael was watching from the back of one meeting with unreadable calm, while Aldo was leaning against the glass wall outside, pretending not to be interested and failing badly enough that Audrey caught him twice. Afterward, he fell into step beside her toward the elevator. "You're building a sermon." Audrey kept her eyes forward. "I'm building an event." "No." His mouth curved. "You're building a room where rich men feel guilty before dessert. Dangerous work." Her eyes stayed forward. "I thought you liked dangerous tables." "I do." His eyes moved over her face. "I just didn't expect you to set one for the entire city." She should not have liked that. She did anyway, only a little. By the time the car brought her back to the estate on the 3rd afternoon, Audrey was tired in a way that felt almost normal. Her feet hurt from heels, and the black, sleeveless dress she had worn to the office had become slightly creased from a long day. The driver was pulling toward the front steps when Audrey saw him. Silvio was back. He was not inside the house, not waiting in the study, or standing at the foot of the stairs like a man who expected the world to arrange itself before him. He was out on the lower field near the sea, shirt sleeves rolled, dark hair touched by the wind, a shotgun balanced in his hands as one of his men released another clay target into the afternoon light. Audrey's breath changed before she could stop it. He lifted the gun, followed the flying disc with that calm, lethal focus of his, and fired. The clay shattered against the pale sky. The sound moved through her body like a warning. She told herself not to be ridiculous. Then she looked at her reflection in the car window, touched her lipstick back into place, and smoothed her hair with 2 quick strokes of her fingers before the driver could open the door. By the time she walked across the grass toward him, her chin was lifted and her pulse had no manners at all. Silvio did not turn immediately. He reloaded without looking at her, then raised the gun again and waited as if he had all the time in the world. The clay flew, he followed it, fired, hit it clean. Only then did he lower the shotgun and look at her. His gaze was moving from her heels to the hem of the black dress, up along the line of her body, then to the lipstick she suddenly regretted touching in the car window. His expression did not change, but Audrey had learned by now that Silvio Gallo could make stillness feel indecent. "So," he said, breaking the gun open, "you started working." Audrey stopped beside him, close enough to smell gunpowder, salt air, and the expensive edge of his cologne. Her eyes stayed on his. "I did." Silvio held her gaze. "And what exactly are you now?" She lifted her chin a little higher. "Special Projects Liaison. Private events and client relations." The corner of his mouth shifted. "Impressive title." Audrey kept her chin up. "It comes with a desk." "And permission?" Audrey held his gaze. "No, it comes with work." For a moment she expected anger, the cold look, the quiet interrogation about who had allowed it. Silvio only turned back toward the field and accepted another shell from the man beside him, without a word. That was almost worse than anger. The clay launched. Silvio lifted the gun and fired. Another clean break scattered through the air. Audrey was watching the fragments fall. Her chin lifted. "You're not angry?" Silvio looked at her then, and this time the side of his mouth curved with something darker than amusement. "I like women with purpose." His gaze slipped down to the black dress, then returned to her face. "Especially when they carry my name." The words moved through her with more heat than praise should have had. Before she could answer, he reloaded, quick, practiced, and held the shotgun toward her. "Come here." Audrey looked at the gun, then at him. "I have never done this." The words came low, without apology. "I know." That should not have made her pulse jump. Audrey heard him before she felt him, the quiet shift of weight in the grass behind her. Then the warmth of him reached her back, and she caught his scent. Gunpowder under cologne, warm skin underneath both. The kind of smell that didn't ask permission. Silvio moved behind her before she could decide whether to refuse. He placed the shotgun carefully in her hands. The veins along his forearms were visible when he reached past her to adjust her grip, not a performance of strength, just the fact of it. His chest came close to her back, not quite pressing, but near enough that every breath she took seemed to measure the space between them. "Stand taller," he murmured near her ear. Audrey straightened. "Not stiff." His hand settled at her waist, and her body reacted before she could stop it. A low current moving upward through her ribs, reaching places she had no intention of acknowledging. "Strong." She swallowed. His palm pressed flat against her stomach, light through the black fabric, and the contact sent a sharp, unwelcome heat radiating upward, reaching her chest before she could breathe through it. "Breathe from here." Audrey tried. Her lungs forgot the instructions. His next words warmed the skin just below her ear. "Look at the target, not at the gun." Her eyes were on the field. "I'm looking." His mouth curved near her ear. "No, you're thinking too much." His fingers covered hers for a second, aligning her hold, and the contact moved through her arms and didn't stop there. Audrey hated how much of her body remembered the bedroom, the clasps, the mirror. His voice leaving her there with nothing but restraint and fire. The clay shot into the air. Silvio's voice came low. "Now!" Audrey fired. The recoil startled her, but Silvio's hand was already firm at her waist, keeping her steady. The clay burst in the air, a small, clean explosion against the sky. She turned her head toward him, breathless, unable to stop smiling. "I hit it!" Silvio looked at her, not at the shattered target. The blue of his eyes held something steadier than cold, steadier than control. The look of a man who had already decided. "That's my girl." The words landed somewhere low and warm, and for a second Audrey's mind went quiet in a way that frightened her more than anything he'd done so far. Then his mouth touched the side of her neck, just below the jaw where her pulse lived, and her knees understood what her brain hadn't finished processing. It was over before she could react. Silvio took the gun from her hands with perfect calm and stepped back as if he had not just set fire to every nerve she owned. His words came quiet, for only her. "I have calls to make." Audrey was staring at him. "You just got back." His eyes stayed on hers a moment longer. "I did." His gaze moved down the black dress one more time, the creases from a long day, the lipstick she'd touched back into place. His next words were meant only for her. "You look like you've been keeping yourself busy." Then he turned and walked toward the house. The wind moved against the black dress, but Audrey barely felt it. What she felt was the ghost of his palm, still warm through the fabric at her stomach, and the specific silence he had left behind, the kind that pressed harder than noise. It was the terrible realization that for 3 days she had not been waiting for freedom from Silvio Gallo. She had been waiting for the sound of him coming back. That evening, Audrey came down to dinner expecting to find Silvio at the head of the table. She hated that she expected it. The dining room looked exactly as it always did. Polished silver, low candles, the kind of quiet luxury that made even an ordinary meal feel arranged for witnesses. Michael was standing near the sideboard, hands clasped in front of him, while the staff moved soundlessly around the table. But Silvio's chair was empty, so was Aldo's. Audrey slowed before she could stop herself. The absence of both brothers should have felt like relief. No blue eyes measuring her. No Aldo leaning back with that poisonous little smile, waiting for the perfect place to drop a word and watch it bleed. Instead, the room felt unfinished. Michael saw her notice. Michael's chin dipped once. "Mr. Gallo and Mr. Aldo are dining in town tonight. Business." Audrey stilled. "Both of them?" Michael's expression did not waver. "Yes, Mrs. Gallo." Naturally. Silvio had been gone for 3 days, come back long enough to put his hands on her waist in a field, call her my girl like he had any right, press a kiss near her jaw, and then disappear again into business without so much as mentioning dinner. She sat down as if none of that mattered. The food was served. She cut into it, took a bite, barely tasted anything. By the 3rd silent minute, irritation began to move under her skin, hot and embarrassing. What exactly had she expected? That Silvio Gallo would come home from a business trip, teach her to shoot, look at her like he wanted to devour her, and then spend the evening asking about her day like an ordinary husband. Audrey set her fork down a little too carefully. "Get a grip." The words landed hard enough that she nearly flinched. "You have been here less than a week. You did not marry him because he loved you. You made an arrangement with a polished Mafia nightmare and then started watching empty chairs like a neglected wife." Her throat tightened. Max's name came into her mind, not with longing but with shame. Max had humiliated her. Max had made her feel manageable, small, useful only when she was convenient. She had not forgotten him in a day because she had loved too lightly. She had stopped loving him because she had finally seen him clearly. Silvio was different. That was the problem. Max had made her want to run. Silvio made her want things she had no business wanting. Audrey pushed her plate away. "Thank you, Michael," she murmured. "I'm not hungry." Michael did not ask why. The next morning, Audrey woke earlier than the house expected her to. By 8, she'd dressed, found Silvio's black card on the vanity, and told the driver she was going into town. Michael arranged security without comment. She did not ask where Silvio was. That was the first victory. The second was leaving before he could notice she had gone. In the car window, the city moved past in bright, polished fragments. Audrey watched her own reflection hover over the glass. Loose hair, dark sunglasses, mouth set with a determination that felt only partly real. A small, wicked thought arrived. If Silvio wanted the world to believe she was Mrs. Gallo, she might as well charge him for the costume. The thought made her smile. By noon, the boutiques had learned her name. Not Audrey, Mrs. Gallo. Every saleswoman seemed to know the card before she handed it over, and after the first 2 shops, Audrey stopped pretending not to enjoy it. She tried on silk, satin, heels too delicate to be practical, a black dress that looked like something Silvio would approve of, and then finally the one she did not want to take off. Deep cherry red, not bright, not sweet, dark enough to look expensive, warm enough to look dangerous. The dress did not announce itself like Aldo's emerald provocation had. It did not ask to be noticed, it assumed it would be. Audrey stood in front of the boutique mirror. The decision settled through her body. Black had been Silvio's control. Green had been Aldo's game. Red would be hers. She bought it. Then she bought the shoes, and because some part of her still felt petty enough to breathe, she added the evening bag too. When Audrey returned to the estate in the afternoon, she stepped out of the car with more shopping bags than she needed and more satisfaction than she intended to show. Silvio was standing near the bottom of the stairs. Aldo was leaning against the console table with his usual ease. Though he tracked the shopping bags with immediate interest, Audrey lifted her chin and walked inside. Aldo's mouth curved. Someone discovered retail therapy. Audrey did not slow. Someone discovered his brother's card had no visible limit. Silvio's eyes dropped to the bags, then came back to her face. It has a limit. Audrey paused on the first stair despite herself. Silvio's expression did not change. You didn't find it. Aldo laughed under his breath. Audrey turned before either of them could see how much she enjoyed that and climbed the stairs with the bag swinging from her wrist like evidence. She had the ridiculous urge to look back. She did not. By late afternoon, Audrey's room looked as if a boutique had exploded across the bed. She laid the cherry-red dress carefully over the chair, placed the shoes beneath it, set the bag beside the mirror, and then filled the bathtub because her body was still carrying the day. The walking, the trying on, the heat of having chosen without asking. Steam rose around her as she sank into the water. She let the heat work on her. A knock came, soft enough to be swallowed by the water and steam. Then the door opened. Audrey's breath caught, but she did not move. Silvio was standing in the doorway. For 1 second, neither of them spoke. He had changed out of his suit jacket, his shirt open at the throat, sleeves rolled as if the day had not finished demanding things from him. He took in the room first. The shopping bags, the dress, the shoes, the vanity. Then her. Audrey was covered by foam and warm water, her hair loose against the edge of the tub, one arm resting along the porcelain as if she had planned to be found this way. She had not, but she was not about to give him the pleasure of knowing that. Silvio leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. Audrey Gallo. Her pulse answered before she did. You're supposed to knock. His chin lifted slightly. You're supposed to answer before I worry. The words should have annoyed her. They did. Not enough. His gaze stayed on her face, but it took discipline for him to keep it there. Audrey saw the effort, and warmth moved through her that had nothing to do with the water. You left, she said, keeping her tone light. Then you came back. Then you disappeared again. Is that a Gallo husband tradition? A faint smile touched his mouth. Is vanishing into boutiques with my card a Gallo wife tradition? It might become one. His eyes moved to the bags along the wall. I saw. She kept her chin level. Naturally. The smile deepened a fraction. 7 o'clock. He pushed off the doorframe slightly. Be ready. We arrive together tonight. Husband and wife. First public appearance. The gala. Audrey's hand tightened under the foam. She lifted her chin. I chose my own dress. He looked back at her. I know. She hated that the simple answer made her look at him more carefully. He turned toward the vanity. I had something brought up for it. Necklace and earrings. They're on the table. Audrey turned her head enough to see the velvet box near the mirror, one she had not noticed before. Black. Quiet. Expensive enough not to need a logo. You bought jewelry for a dress you haven't seen? Silvio's gaze came back to her. I know what red needs. The water suddenly felt too warm. Audrey looked at him from the bathtub, refusing to be the first one to lower her eyes. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. And what does red need? He held her gaze for one long, controlled second. Restraint. He let the word sit there for a moment. Then he pushed away from the doorframe. Don't keep me waiting. He left before she could answer. Audrey sat very still in the bath, surrounded by steam, foam, and the kind of silence that made a woman painfully aware of her own heartbeat. At 7, Audrey stood at the top of the staircase in the cherry-red dress. The color looked deeper under the hallway lights, rich against her skin, dark enough to make the diamonds at her throat burn white. Silvio's necklace sat perfectly against her collarbone, the earrings catching every small movement of her head. She had chosen the dress. He had chosen the fire around it. For a moment, she let herself breathe before she stepped down. Silvio was waiting below. Aldo was standing a few feet behind him. Both men looked up when her heel touched the first stair. Aldo's smile began, then failed before it became one. For once, he looked at her without immediately reaching for a joke, and the silence that crossed his face was more dangerous than anything he might have said. But Audrey's eyes went to Silvio. He did not move. His gaze followed her down every step, from the red dress to the diamonds he had chosen, then to her mouth, where the lipstick matched the dangerous warmth of the fabric. By the time she reached the last stair, the air between them had tightened so completely that even Aldo seemed to know better than to speak. Audrey stopped in front of him. For one more second, Silvio looked at her. "You chose well." Audrey touched the necklace lightly. "So did you." His attention dropped to her fingers at her throat. For one reckless moment, she thought he might touch her there. Instead, Michael appeared near the entrance with the careful timing of a man saving everyone from themselves. He stepped forward. "The cars are ready." Silvio offered Audrey his arm. She placed her hand on it, feeling the strength under the fabric of his sleeve. Then Michael added, "One more thing. Max Gordon is on the final guest list. He confirmed this afternoon." Audrey's hand tightened on Silvio's arm. Silvio did not look away from her. Aldo's voice came from behind them, quieter than usual. "Well," he murmured, "that should make the evening memorable." Silvio's hand covered Audrey's where it rested on his arm. "Let it." Then he led her toward the door. The first flash went off before Audrey had fully stepped out of the car. For one startled second, all she saw was white light against the night, the hotel entrance glowing ahead of them, the red carpet stretching toward a row of cameras and reporters held back by velvet ropes and men in black suits. The city had come dressed in diamonds and discretion, and every face turned the moment Silvio Gallo appeared beside her. His hand found the small of her back before the second flash hit. Not low enough to be improper, not high enough to be casual. Exactly where the open back of her cherry-red dress left her skin bare, his palm warm and steady against her, as if he had always known how to stand beside her, in front of a crowd. Audrey lifted her chin. The diamonds he had chosen burned cold at her throat. The red dress was moving around her legs with every step, dark and liquid under the camera lights. She had told herself in the car that this was only a public appearance, only another part of the agreement, only another performance she had to survive with her spine straight and her smile sharp. Then Silvio leaned down and pressed his mouth to the side of her neck. The cameras went off all at once. Audrey's skin registered the warmth of his mouth before her mind caught up with what was happening. His lips stayed there for no more than a second, a controlled, deliberate claim placed exactly where every camera could see it and where her pulse could betray her. When he lifted his head, his hand did not leave her back. "Smile," he murmured, barely moving his mouth. Audrey kept her eyes forward, her smile settling into place as the cameras flashed harder. "I am smiling." His thumb moved once against the bare skin of her back, slow enough to make her knees remember the shooting field. "No." His voice came low beside her ear. "Now you are." Before Audrey could answer, a reporter near the front called out over the crowd, "Mr. Gallo, is it true you married Max Gordon's runaway fiancée the same day she left him at the altar?" The question cut through the red carpet noise cleanly enough that several conversations around them stopped. Audrey felt the old humiliation try to rise in her throat. Silvio did not stiffen. He did not glare. He only turned slightly, drawing Audrey closer with the hand at her back so that the cameras caught them together when he spoke. "What's true," he said, his voice smooth enough to sound almost polite, "is that Mrs. Gallo walked away from a man who did not deserve her." The reporter tried to speak again, but Silvio's calm did not make room for interruption. "Max Gordon lost a fiancée." His gaze was moving over the cameras as if he were speaking to the whole city and not one man with a microphone. "I gained a woman this city will remember for more than a scandal." Audrey's smile almost faltered, not from fear, from the force of being lifted instead of hidden. His grip at her back stayed as he guided her forward, and the crowd parted for them with the strange obedience power always seemed to receive when it wore a perfect suit. Inside, the gala did not look remade, so much as redirected. Audrey had not rebuilt the gala in 3 days. She had simply given the existing machine a pulse. The tables were still elegant, the flowers still lush, the donors still glittering under chandeliers, but the entrance wall no longer carried cold, abstract art. The events team had replaced it with photographs from the Harbour Archive, workers' families, daughters standing beside mothers before dawn, old hands tying ropes, children growing up near water that had fed the city and taken more than it gave. The donor cards had been rewritten around real families instead of numbers, and the old speech order had been rearranged so the night opened with a story instead of a sponsor list. People were reading slowly, stopping. Some were pointing. Audrey let out a breath she had been holding since Tuesday. Michael appeared at Silvio's side and spoke quietly, but Audrey was close enough to hear. "The early pledges are already above last year." Silvio did not answer right away. His eyes were on Audrey, who had stepped aside to correct a seating issue before it became visible to anyone else. She was speaking softly to the event coordinator, adjusting two cards, signaling for the lighting to lower before the first video played, moving through the room with the calm authority of a woman who had been underestimated long enough to learn the value of precision. When she returned to him, Silvio was still watching her. "What?" Audrey asked, suddenly too aware of the red dress, the diamonds, and the way his gaze seemed to take in more than the room could see. He did not answer her directly. A few minutes later, when the first welcome remarks ended and the room turned toward the stage, Silvio stepped to the microphone. Audrey expected a business speech, a polished thank you, the usual language of donors, legacy, commitment, and community. Instead, Silvio looked across the room until his eyes found hers. "Tonight was supposed to be another gallo event," he began, his voice carrying with quiet command. "Another beautiful room, another expensive dinner, another evening where powerful people congratulate one another for being generous." A low ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Silvio did not smile. "Mrs. Gallo changed that." Audrey went still. She asked why anyone should care. She asked whose lives were being spoken about while the city applauded itself. She turned this evening away from performance and toward purpose. His gaze stayed on hers, and for a moment the entire ballroom seemed to fall away. "I gave her a room full of powerful people. She gave them a reason to feel human." The applause came slowly at first, then rose with real warmth. Audrey felt it move toward her from every side, saw people turning, smiling, lifting glasses in her direction, but the only face she could truly see was Silvio's. There was pride in his eyes. Not the possessive kind he used like armor. This was different, quieter, unguarded, and she had no idea what to do with it. It made her chest tighten in a way she did not know how to defend against. Aldo was standing near the bar with a glass in his hand, watching them both. For once, even he did not interrupt the moment with a joke. Not yet. Max Gordon found her during the second hour. Audrey had stepped into a quieter corridor near the terrace doors to speak with the florist about the final arrangement on the auction table when his voice came from behind her, familiar enough to turn her stomach before she turned around. "Well," Max said, taking in the red dress, the diamonds, the composed woman in front of him. "You learned quickly." Audrey dismissed the florist with a small nod and waited until they were alone enough for dignity and public enough for safety. She turned. "Max." His smile looked almost handsome until the bitterness reached it. "You were a secretary last week. Now you're wearing gallo diamonds like they make you royalty." His eyes dropped briefly to the necklace at her throat. "Still playing dress-up, Audrey? Different man? Better leash?" The words struck an old bruise, but not as deeply as they would have before. That surprised her. Audrey looked at him for a long second and realized the man in front of her seemed smaller than the memory of him. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I was a secretary when you needed me to fix your life." She held his gaze. "I only became small when you started calling me manageable." Max's jaw shifted. Silvio appeared at the corridor entrance behind Max. Audrey saw Max notice first. The color in his face changed before Silvio reached her. A moment later, Silvio's hand settled against the bare curve of her back, calm and certain, his thumb resting just beneath the edge of the diamond clasp at her neck. The words came low, without performance. She was never small. Max forced a laugh that fooled no one. Silvio's gaze did not move from him. "You had a woman who could build a room, read a room, and rule one if she wanted." His voice remained low, almost conversational, which somehow made every word more humiliating. "And you called her manageable." Audrey felt his hand steady against her back. "That says nothing about her, Max. It says everything about the size of the man standing beside her." Max's mouth opened, then closed again. Audrey felt it settle over her, not like rescue, but like recognition. For a second, the only sound was the music drifting from the ballroom. Silvio leaned slightly closer, not threatening enough for anyone passing by to name it, but enough for Max to understand it completely. "Enjoy the gala," quietly. Then he turned Audrey away from him with a touch so gentle it almost hurt. She did not speak until they were back inside the ballroom. She kept her eyes forward. "You didn't have to do that." Silvio did not look at her. "I know." The answer should have irritated her. It did, but not enough to stop the warmth spreading under her ribs. Aldo waited until his evening had almost convinced Audrey it could be beautiful before he stepped beside her. By then, the gala had become the kind of success people would discuss politely for weeks while pretending it had not unsettled them. Donations had climbed. Reporters had stayed longer than expected. More than one donor's wife had stopped Audrey to say the evening felt different from any gala event she had attended before. Silvio had been drawn into a conversation near the main table with 2 councilmen and a shipping executive, his attention outwardly fixed on business while Audrey was standing a short distance away, speaking with a hospital director about the scholarship fund. Aldo arrived at her side as if he had been summoned by the first quiet moment. "You made them cry before the entree," he murmured, his glass hanging loosely between his fingers. "That is almost cruel." Audrey kept her public smile in place, aware of the people around them, the cameras, the donors who could turn any scene into a story by morning. Her smile stayed even. "I thought you liked cruel." "I like honest." His eyes were moving over her face, and for once the amusement there was not the only thing she saw. Tonight was both. The compliment slipped under her guard before she could stop it. "Careful, Aldo. That almost sounded sincere." It was. The word landed too quietly. Audrey's smile remained for the room, but her attention sharpened. Aldo stepped half a pace closer, lowering his voice as if they were discussing nothing more dangerous than the champagne. His thumb brushed the open skin at the side of her waist, right where the red dress dipped low along her back. The touch was brief, barely there, intentional enough to be a line crossed. Her breath shortened before she could control it. Her smile did not move. Her voice came wrapped in a smile sharp enough that only he would hear the blade under it. "Aldo, you should not touch me like that." His thumb withdrew, but he did not step back. "I was congratulating you?" "No." Audrey turned her face toward him just enough to keep the conversation private. "You were testing him through me." For the first time that night, Aldo's expression lost its easy polish. Her smile stayed for the room. "I've told you before, whatever this marriage started as, I am loyal to Silvio." Aldo's eyes were searching hers. "And?" Audrey's breath moved carefully through her chest. "And I care what he thinks." His face changed before he could cover it. From across the ballroom, Silvio saw only the closeness, the smile Audrey kept for appearances, and Aldo's hand, withdrawing from the bare skin at her waist. His expression did not change. That was the danger. The event coordinator caught Audrey a moment later, drawing her toward a last-minute issue near the auction table. Across the room, Silvio was watching Aldo disappear through a side corridor. When Audrey disappeared toward the auction table, Silvio followed the corridor Aldo had taken. Aldo was near the staff entrance when Silvio found him, one shoulder against the wall, his glass still in his hand, his smile already waiting. Silvio stopped in front of his brother with a calm that had nothing merciful in it. "I told you before not to touch my wife, Aldo." Aldo's smile did not move. Silvio stepped closer, his voice still controlled, still almost elegant. "I know you have always had an appetite for things that belong to me, but not Audrey. I do not want your hand on her, your mouth near her, or even your shadow close enough to make her turn her head. This will not end well for you." Aldo's answer came smooth and poisonous. "What makes Audrey different, brother?" Silvio's eyes did not move from his. "This is the last time I'm going to warn you, Aldo." Aldo's smile stayed where it was. Silvio stepped closer, his voice still quiet, still controlled, but the air around him had gone cold. "Do not go near Audrey. Do not touch her. Do not speak about her as if she is another piece on your board." Aldo's mouth curved. "Isn't she?" Silvio's gaze sharpened. Aldo tilted his head, enjoying the cut he was making. "Isn't she just an arrangement? A pretty little condition to make sure the chair doesn't pass to me. Maybe she likes standing near me. Maybe, if she were given a real choice, she would choose differently." He let that sit. "Why don't you ask her?" Silvio looked at his brother for one long, lethal second. There is nothing to ask. Aldo's smile thinned. Silvio's voice dropped into something colder than anger. Audrey is mine. She knows it. I know it. And if you need to be reminded again, you will not enjoy the lesson. Aldo studied him, the smile still there, but less certain now. That sounds like ownership, brother. For the first time, Silvio's face changed, only slightly. Enough. I care about her. The words were quiet, stripped of performance, and somehow more dangerous than the threat before them. For the first time that night, Aldo's smile faded before he could turn it into another joke. The car ride home was colder than the sea outside the windows. Silvio was sitting beside her, one hand resting on his knee, his face turned toward the dark road ahead. He had been magnificent in the ballroom, ruthless with Max, proud of her before the entire city, and then, the moment the doors closed and they were alone, he withdrew into a silence so complete it felt like punishment. Audrey waited for him to speak. He did not. At first she told herself to let him have his mood. Then she remembered Aldo's thumb at her waist, the way Silvio had gone cold afterward, and the way he now sat beside her as if she had done something wrong. Audrey turned toward the window first, then toward him. "You've been quiet since we left." Silvio did not look away from the road. "I have nothing useful to say." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. That has never stopped a man before. A muscle moved in his jaw, but he still kept his gaze on the road. "You handled my brother well tonight." Audrey turned toward him, trying to read the shape of the accusation beneath the almost compliment. "I told him not to touch me." Silvio's voice came flat enough to sting. "From where I stood, it looked like you told him with a smile." The unfairness of it hit her so quickly that for a moment she could only stare at him. Then her voice dropped. "We were in a ballroom full of donors, reporters, and your family's reputation. Did you want me to slap your brother in front of half the city?" Silvio finally looked at her. There was jealousy in his eyes, the old, quiet kind, the kind that had already made its decision. "I wanted him to know better than to touch you at all." "He did know," Audrey shot back, then caught herself, lowering her voice before anger could make her careless. "That is why he did it." Silvio's gaze held hers for one hard second before he looked away again. The rest of the ride passed in a silence Audrey could feel against her skin. By the time the car pulled up to the estate, her chest was tight with the kind of anger that had nowhere decent to go. Silvio stepped out first and offered his hand because the driver was watching, because the staff was waiting, because the whole house lived on appearances. Audrey took it. His fingers closed around hers with perfect control. Too perfect. Inside, he released her almost immediately. "Good night, Audrey." Then he turned toward the corridor that led to his rooms. He left without explanation, without apology, without a touch that had not been part of the performance. Audrey stood in the entrance hall while the red dress settled around her legs, and the diamonds at her throat suddenly felt colder than they had all night. He had raised her in front of the whole city, then punished her in private for a smile she had worn to protect them both. Her hands curled slowly at her sides. The rage that moved through her was quiet and certain. No, not this time. She had been the runaway bride once. She had been the woman pulled through doors, placed at tables, dressed in other people's decisions, watched, weighed, claimed, and corrected. But she was not going to stand in this hall and wonder what she had done wrong while Silvio Gallo buried his jealousy under silence and called it control. Audrey looked towards the corridor where he had disappeared. Her pulse was still too fast. Her anger was hotter than her fear. The thought came to her clearly, dangerously, almost calmly. She was going to knock on his door. Audrey reached Silvio's door before her anger had time to become fear. The red dress was still clinging to her like the last heat of the gala, the diamonds at her throat catching the hallway light with every breath she tried to steady. She had walked away from all of it, but not from the way he had looked at her in the car as if she had done something wrong simply by surviving the evening with grace. She knocked once, hard enough to mean it. For a moment, nothing moved behind the door, and the quiet almost gave her a chance to turn back. Then the handle shifted, and Silvio opened it. His white shirt was open at the throat, the sleeves rolled to reveal the veined forearms she still remembered from the field. His face was unreadable. That was what made her draw a deep breath, calm enough to make her feel foolish for arriving in a storm. No anger, no softness, no apology. Just Silvio Gallo standing in the doorway watching her. Audrey lifted her chin before his silence could make her smaller. What was that? Silvio's eyes moved over her face with slow, infuriating control. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, his voice even when it came. What was what? The mildness in his tone nearly snapped her in two. Audrey stepped closer before she could think better of it. Don't do that. Don't stand there like you don't know exactly what I mean. His head tilted slightly, the blue of his eyes sharpening in the low light. Say it clearly. Her voice dropped. Fine. Her hands curled at her sides, the cold diamonds against her throat suddenly feeling too tight. You don't get to put your hand on my back in front of an entire city, kiss my neck for cameras, praise me like I matter, and then sit beside me in the car like I'm a stranger who offended you. A flicker moved behind his eyes, barely there, then gone. Audrey saw it and hated that she cared. Silvio's gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes with the same controlled cruelty he used when he wanted her to reveal more than she meant to. So that is what bothered you. Heat rose into her face so quickly that anger had to carry it, or she would drown in embarrassment. What bothered me, she said, her voice lower now, sharper, is being treated like a wife when it suits you, and a problem when it doesn't. For the first time, his expression changed. Not much, not enough for anyone else to name, but Audrey had spent a week learning the smallest weather shifts in this man, and this one was dark. Silvio straightened from the doorframe. Before Audrey could look away, his fingers caught beneath her chin and lifted her face back to his gaze locked on hers, calm and possessive, as if the word had given him something he intended to keep. A wife, he repeated. Audrey realized too late what she had said. The word hung between them, alive and dangerous. His fingers left her chin, but the heat of that touch stayed there. She took half a step back, furious with herself, furious with him, furious with the red dress and the diamonds and the fact that some part of her had come to this door not only to fight, but to be answered. She turned. Forget it. Talking to you is impossible. Silvio moved before she made it one step. His hand closed around her wrist, and the next second she was inside his room, the door shutting behind her with a sound that went straight through her chest. Audrey turned on him, breath sharp, eyes bright with anger. The room was dim behind him, but all she could really see was Silvio, the open throat of his shirt, the hands that had pulled her in before she could turn her pride into an exit. What is between you and Aldo? The question came cold and direct, and for one stunned second Audrey felt the whole gala rearrange itself in her mind. Aldo's thumb at her waist, the smile she had kept for the room, Silvio's face from across the ballroom, too still to read. That was what this was. Her anger came back steadier than before. Her voice came controlled, each word placed because the alternative would have been throwing the truth at him hard enough to draw blood. He is your brother. There is nothing between us. Silvio was coming closer with a silence that felt heavier than accusation. His eyes stayed on hers, blue gone dark at the edges, his body close enough now that the heat of him began to argue with every sensible thought she had left. He touched you. Her voice dropped, the edge in it sharpening, and I told him not to. I told him I was loyal to you. Silvio's gaze moved over her face as if he were looking for the part she had kept hidden from him. Loyal, he repeated, low enough that the word seemed to land against her skin. To the agreement? Or to me? Audrey swallowed, and the silence that followed exposed too much. Does it matter? She asked. His hand came to her waist and pulled her closer, sudden and exact, until the red silk brushed the open front of his shirt, and the diamonds at her throat caught between them. His mouth hovered near hers, close enough for her to feel the warmth of each word. Tonight, it matters. The answer lit through her. Audrey's fingers went to his shirt, gripping the fabric at his chest because it was the only way to keep herself upright and angry at the same time. You don't get to be jealous, Silvio. You don't get to disappear. Come back, touch me like I belong to you, then punish me because your brother wanted you to look. His eyes dropped to her hands on him. That was the last warning she got. Silvio's arm slid behind her back, and he pulled her into him so fast the breath left her. His mouth found hers before the anger had finished leaving her lips, fierce and deep, a kiss that felt less like surrender than collision. Audrey made a sound against him, half shock, half want she had been fighting for days, and Silvio answered by turning her against the door. The wood met her back, his body filling the space in front of her. The red dress was suddenly too thin, too soft, too alive between them. Audrey's hands slid up his chest, past the open buttons, and when her palms found the heat of his skin, the last clean line between fury and wanting blurred beyond use. He kissed her harder. Audrey stopped trying to make sense of it. Her anger was still there, burning in her throat, but his mouth turned it wild. Her fingers dug into his shirt, pulling him closer while his hand moved from her waist to the bare line of her back, the same place Aldo had touched. Only this time the contact did not feel like theft. It felt like an answer. His lips left hers and moved to her jaw, then lower to the side of her neck, exactly where he had kissed her in front of the cameras. The public claim had been elegant. This one was not. Just breath and heat, and the rough edge of a man who had spent too long pretending restraint was still an option. "Silvio," she breathed, and the sound betrayed her completely. He lifted his head. The unreadable man at the door was gone. The man looking at her now was all blue fire and restraint breaking at the edges. His voice came rough against her mouth. "You came to my door." Audrey held his gaze, her fingers still twisted in the front of his shirt. Angry. His hand tightened at her back. "Still?" Her answer should have been simple. It wasn't. Her body had already chosen before her pride could catch up. Audrey hated him for seeing it. Then she pulled him back to her. The sound that left him was low and almost disbelieving, swallowed by the next kiss. He lifted her in one hard motion, and Audrey's arms went around his shoulders, as if her body had been waiting for permission, her mind refused to give. Her heels left the floor, the room shifted around them. The lamp, the desk, the city lights, the heat of his hand under her thigh, the red silk sliding higher as he carried her. He set her on the edge of the desk, with enough force to make her gasp. Silvio was standing between her knees, shirt open where her hands had dragged at the buttons, his chest rising with the breath he was no longer hiding. Audrey looked at him and felt the full danger of being wanted by a man who had spent a week turning restraint into a weapon. Then she reached for him again. That finished whatever was left of him. His hands found the red dress, not with the slow patience he had given the emerald one, but with a hunger that made her entire body answer before the fabric even moved. His lips were following the line of her shoulder as one strap slipped under his fingers. Audrey's head fell back, one hand in his hair, the other braced on the desk, while heat gathered low and fast, stealing the shape of every careful thought. The red dress had been her challenge when she walked downstairs. Under his hands, it became her answer. Silvio's palm was moving along her bare thigh, up to the edge of the fabric, then held there, as if the last inch of it still mattered to him. Audrey looked down at that hand, strong and veined against the red silk, and a clarity moved through her that frightened her less than it should have. She covered his hand with hers and moved it herself. Silvio went still, only for a second. Then he came back to her with a force that made the room disappear. There were no reporters now, no donors, no Max, no Aldo, no agreement strong enough to stand between the way his hands learned her and the way her body rose to meet them. Audrey had thought desire would feel like losing herself. With Silvio, it felt like being found in a place she had kept locked, even from herself. He carried her from the desk toward the bed, his lips never far from hers, her fingers tangled in his hair, his shirt open beneath her hands. Somewhere between the desk and the shadows, the red silk loosened further, sliding where his hands guided it, and Audrey stopped keeping count of all the reasons this should not be happening. Silvio laid her down as if he were still trying to be careful and failing with every breath. The city lights cut pale lines across his shoulders as he came over her, and when he looked at her, nothing in his face belonged to the agreement anymore. Only want. Only the truth they had both been circling since the church. Audrey reached for him before he could speak. The night took the rest of their words. Audrey woke because someone was touching her hair. For a few seconds she stayed between sleep and waking, aware first of warmth, then of the slow movement of fingers through her hair, then of the unfamiliar weight of a man's gaze resting on her face without asking anything from her. Morning light had slipped through the curtains in pale gold lines, softening the room, softening the hard edges of the man beside her. Though nothing could make Silvio Gallo look harmless, he was already awake. His blue eyes were on her, clear and dark at the same time, watching her as if the night had not ended when the room went quiet. His hand was moving through her hair, patient, and warmth moved through Audrey's chest before she remembered to be shy. Silvio's mouth curved. "Good morning, wife." The word moved through her like a touch. Audrey felt heat rise into her face and hated that he saw it. He lowered his head before she could hide behind a clever answer and placed a small kiss on her mouth, then another. Softer than the night had been, slower, almost teasing, as if he had all morning to learn how she woke beneath him. His hand slid from her hair to her shoulder, then down to her waist under the sheet. Audrey caught his wrist, laughing under her breath as her body betrayed her with a shiver. Oh no. Silvio's smile deepened, lazy and dangerous in the morning light. Oh no? His chin lifted slightly. Her fingers tightened around his wrist, though she made no real effort to move it away. Again? He leaned closer, his mouth brushing the corner of hers as he spoke. You drive me out of my mind. That should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, Audrey moved. Silvio's eyes sharpened as she pushed him onto his back and shifted over him, the sheet falling around her hips, her hair slipping over one shoulder as she looked down at the man who had spent so much of their strange marriage setting rules around her. For once, he looked almost surprised. Audrey bent close enough for her lips to touch the breath at his mouth. In this bed, she whispered. I make the rules. A low laugh moved through his chest. He shook his head slowly, but his hands had already found her waist. Wicked girl. Audrey smiled against his mouth. This time, when the morning pulled them under, it did not feel like losing a battle. It felt like choosing one. An hour later, the room had grown brighter. The sheets were tangled around them. The red dress from the night before lay somewhere near the chair, and Audrey rested against Silvio's chest with one leg thrown over his. His hand was moving through her hair in a slow, absent rhythm, as if his body had learned the motion before his mind could forbid it. For the first time since she had entered the Gallo house, the silence did not feel like a test. Audrey was tracing her fingers lightly over his chest, following the steady beat beneath her palm. Why did marriage matter so much in your father's will? Silvio's fingers paused in her hair. The question did not surprise him. The fact that he answered did. My father trusted structure more than he trusted love, he said after a moment, his voice lower now, stripped of the rough heat from earlier. Marriage, heirs, household, name. To him, they were all part of the same architecture. Audrey lifted her head enough to see his face. He was looking at the ceiling, jaw relaxed and tense at once, the way men looked when they had lived too long beside a memory and still did not know what to do with it. His voice dropped lower. My father wanted a man with a household, not just a throne. Audrey let the sentence settle between them. Then her thumb moved once against his skin. Aldo acts like the world took something from him. Silvio's mouth tightened slightly. Because in his mind, it did. Audrey watched him carefully. And you became the person he could blame. His fingers returned to her hair, slower this time. Yes. The honesty in that single word felt heavier than any explanation. His eyes stayed on the ceiling. He never forgave my father. I was only the face he could reach. Audrey stayed quiet, giving him room to keep going if he chose to. His palm settled at the back of her head, not holding her there, simply touching, as if the contact made the next words possible. My mother died when I was born. Audrey's fingers stopped moving. Silvio was not looking at her. They said it was bleeding. His voice remained controlled, which somehow made it hurt more. No one called it my fault. The pause after that was small, cruel. They didn't have to. Audrey's throat tightened. She could see him suddenly, not as the man who ruled rooms with a glance, but as a boy growing up under the weight of a death no one explained gently enough, a boy chosen for power before anyone had told him he was allowed to be innocent. She moved her hand over his chest again, not to soothe him like a child, but to remind him that she was there. So Aldo grew up believing you took his place. Silvio's eyes lowered to hers at last. Her voice came softer. And you grew up believing you took her life. For a moment he said nothing. The room felt very still. Then a faint, pained smile touched the edge of his mouth. You make wounds sound organized. Audrey rested her chin on his chest. They usually are. People just bleed from strange places. Silvio looked at her for a long time. This was different from every other way he had looked at her. This look had nothing of audience, nothing of strategy or performance in it. Only a man realizing that the woman beside him had found the hidden door inside a locked house and had not run when it opened. Audrey felt suddenly exposed under it. She lowered her eyes first. Silvio's hand moved once through her hair, slow and absent, as if he had already made the decision before he found the words for it. I want to marry you again. Audrey lifted her head. What? His mouth curved faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. Properly. In front of everyone who thinks this began as an arrangement. Audrey pushed herself up on one elbow, the sheet slipping lower around her shoulder. Silvio. He caught her hand before she could retreat into doubt and brought her knuckles to his mouth. His lips brushed her fingers once, then stayed there as he looked at her. I want it done properly, in front of everyone. No side room, no conditions, no Max Gordon at the door. His thumb moved across her knuckles. Because this time, Audrey, I want everyone to know I chose you. The words entered her slowly, too large to answer at once. Then the question rose before she could soften it. Why are you choosing me, Silvio? His hand stilled around hers. Audrey forced herself to hold his gaze. Last week I was Max Gordon's manageable fiancé. Then I was your escape plan, then your condition, your wife on paper, your public statement. Her voice thinned around the last words, but she kept going. I know what I am useful for. I am asking why you want me. Silvio shifted beneath her, rising just enough to bring his face closer to hers. His hand came to her cheek, thumb moving once along the skin below her eye. Because you walked into my life terrified and still looked at me like I was the one who should be careful. Audrey's breath caught. Because you challenge every room you enter, even when you think you are only trying to survive. His voice deepened, rougher now. Because you saw the wound under the name Gallo, and did not mistake it for weakness. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Silvio's thumb traced the edge of her mouth. And because when I think of the future now, it no longer looks like what my father built and left for me to guard. He looked at her as if this cost him more than any confession he had ever made. It looks like you standing in it. Audrey was staring at him, this dangerous man who had become her shelter, her storm, her impossible choice, and felt the last fragile piece of the agreement between them finally give way. This time nothing in her wanted to run. 3 months changed the Gallo house in ways no one announced. It began with small betrayals of routine. Breakfast started 10 minutes later, then 20. Michael stopped asking whether Mrs. Gallo would be joining the table and simply instructed the kitchen to keep the coffee warm. The maids learned to knock twice and wait. The men outside Silvio's study learned to look straight ahead when Audrey entered with a file in one hand and left without it, her lipstick slightly smudged and Silvio's voice lower behind the closed door. Aldo noticed everything. One morning, when Audrey arrived at breakfast with Silvio's hand resting possessively at the small of her back and her hair pinned too quickly to be convincing, Aldo lowered his newspaper just enough to look over the edge of it. The entire house, he murmured into his coffee, is pretending not to know why breakfast has become a late-morning concept. Audrey's cheeks warmed before she could stop them. Silvio did not even look at him as he pulled out Audrey's chair. Read your paper. I am, Aldo returned, turning the page with grave innocence. Unfortunately, the domestic section is much more entertaining. Michael, standing near the sideboard, reached for the coffee pot with the expression of a man who had survived wars by never smiling at the wrong time. Audrey sat, hiding her face behind her cup, and beneath the table Silvio's fingers found hers. The touch was calm, private, a quiet correction to every part of her that still sometimes woke up expecting the old world to return and tell her this one had been borrowed. It had not been borrowed. She was starting to believe that. Day by day, Audrey felt herself taking root. At Gallo Harbour Group, people stopped lowering their voices in the same frightened way when she passed. They still looked. They still knew exactly whose wife she was. But by the end of the first month, department heads brought her problems before they became disasters. And by the second, no one in private events and client relations sent a proposal upstairs without asking whether Mrs. Gallo had seen it. She learned the rhythms of donors, city officials, old families, nervous sponsors, bored wives, men who thought money excused bad manners, and women who noticed everything while appearing to notice nothing. Power, she discovered, did not always enter a room loudly. Sometimes it sat at a table, moved one name card, rewrote one sentence, and turned obligation into feeling. She had been doing that her whole life. She just hadn't known it had a name. The Harbour Foundation became hers in a way no one had quite expected. The gala's success had opened doors. Audrey used them before anyone could decide whether she was allowed to. She met hospital administrators, midwives, social workers, retired nurses, women who had given birth in fear, and women who had nearly died because fear had been treated as inconvenience. She listened more than she spoke. Not long after, a council member mentioned the foundation at a dinner Audrey did not attend. Silvio set down his glass. "My wife built that." Not with pride. The way a man states a fact he has been waiting for the world to catch up to. That same week, she came home one evening and placed a proposal on his desk. He looked up from a contract, one hand still holding his pen. Audrey was standing across from him in a cream blouse and dark skirt, hair loose over one shoulder, eyes steady in the way they became when she had already decided to fight for something. "I want to expand the foundation." Silvio leaned back slightly, giving the pages his full attention because he had learned that Audrey's quiet voice often carried the most dangerous ideas. His eyes were moving over the title. Lucia Gallo, Women's Care Fund. For a moment he did not move. Audrey saw the stillness land in him before he could hide it. Her voice came more gently now. It would support maternal care, emergency birth services, high-risk pregnancies, postpartum care. We can begin with harbour families and expand from there. Silvio's gaze remained on his mother's name. The room changed around them, though nothing in it moved. The desk, the lamp, the bookshelves, the heavy curtains, all of it seemed to draw back and leave him alone with a woman he had never known and a death he had never been allowed to grieve cleanly. Audrey crossed around the desk and stood beside him. "I don't want her name to live only in what happened to her." Silvio's hand closed around the edge of the paper. His voice, when it came, was rougher than he meant it to be. "You should have warned me before putting that in front of me." Audrey touched his shoulder. Her voice came quiet, without apology. "I thought if I warned you, you would say no before you could feel why you wanted to say yes." Silvio looked up at her then, and for a second the powerful man behind the desk was gone. In his place was the boy who had carried a death like a debt. Audrey bent and kissed his forehead before he could turn the moment into command. "Let her name do something living," she whispered. He caught her wrist before she could pull away, bringing her palm to his mouth with the kind of reverence he still tried to disguise as control. "All right." That was all he said. It was enough. 1 week before the wedding, Aldo found Audrey near the lower terrace. The afternoon had the clean, salted brightness that came before evening, and the sea beyond the estate was moving restlessly under a pale sky. Audrey had gone outside with a folder from the foundation, but the pages sat untouched beside her. Her thoughts were with the wedding now, with the strange tenderness of choosing flowers for a marriage that had already begun in fire, with the white dress waiting upstairs that did not feel like a costume this time. Aldo approached without his usual glass, which made him look more honest and somehow more dangerous. Audrey heard him before she saw him. If you came to make a joke about flowers, choose carefully, she murmured, eyes still on the water. I'm in a sentimental mood, and I may not forgive you. Aldo sat at the far end of the stone bench, leaving a careful distance between them. His voice came flat. No joke. That made her turn. His face had none of its easy brightness. No amusement, no cruelty. Only Aldo, pale-eyed and restless, looking toward the sea as if it had once promised him something and failed to deliver. For a while neither of them spoke. Then he drew a slow breath. Was there ever a version of this story where you chose me? Audrey did not answer quickly. He deserved the truth, not comfort dressed as kindness. She kept her eyes on the water a moment longer. Maybe. In a version where you wanted me more than you wanted to hurt him? Aldo's mouth curved, but the smile never reached his eyes. That is a very clean knife, Audrey. You asked me a real question. His eyes came back to her. I did. She looked back at the water, letting the wind move through her hair. You saw me. I know that. That took the smile from his mouth entirely. Audrey turned slightly toward him, her voice softer now, without turning him into either villain or victim. You noticed when I was angry, when I was frightened, when I was trying not to show either. You noticed before most people did. Aldo's fingers were resting loosely against his knee. But Silvio let me change him. She held his gaze. And I let him change me. He gave a quiet, humorless breath. That sounds exhausting. It is. His eyes moved to the water. And worth it? Audrey turned then, her answer already in her face before she spoke. Yes. Aldo looked away first. The sea kept moving. Somewhere behind them, the house held its breath. His voice came low, almost to himself. I spent my whole life arriving second. Her chest tightened, but she did not reach for him. Aldo would have turned comfort into a joke, and they both knew it, so she gave him the truth instead. Then stop making every room a race. His jaw worked once. For a moment he looked younger than Silvio, though Audrey knew that was not how the story had begun. He looked like a man who had kept running long after everyone else had left the track. Aldo stood, brushing an invisible crease from his trousers. Careful, Mrs. Gallo. Keep saying things like that and people may start mistaking you for merciful. Audrey allowed herself a small smile. No one who knows me that well. He looked at her for one last second, and an expression crossed his face that had no name. Then he nodded once and walked back toward the house. For the first time, Audrey watched him leave without feeling that he was taking a piece of trouble with him. He was carrying some of it away. She kept her eyes on the water a moment longer. Maybe. In a version where you wanted me more than you wanted to hurt him? Aldo's mouth curved, but the smile never reached his eyes. That is a very clean knife, Audrey. You asked me a real question. His eyes came back to her. I did. She looked back at the water, letting the wind move through her hair. You saw me. I know that. That took the smile from his mouth entirely. Audrey turned slightly toward him, her voice softer now, without turning him into either villain or victim. You noticed when I was angry, when I was frightened, when I was trying not to show either. You noticed before most people did. Aldo's fingers were resting loosely against his knee. But Silvio let me change him. She held his gaze. And I let him change me. He gave a quiet, humorless breath. That sounds exhausting. It is. His eyes moved to the water. And worth it? Audrey turned then, her answer already in her face before she spoke. Yes. Aldo looked away first. The sea kept moving. Somewhere behind them, the house held its breath. His voice came low, almost to himself. I spent my whole life arriving second. Her chest tightened, but she did not reach for him. Aldo would have turned comfort into a joke, and they both knew it, so she gave him the truth instead. Then stop making every room a race. His jaw worked once. For a moment he looked younger than Silvio, though Audrey knew that was not how the story had begun. He looked like a man who had kept running long after everyone else had left the track. Aldo stood, brushing an invisible crease from his trousers. Careful, Mrs. Gallo. Keep saying things like that and people may start mistaking you for merciful. Audrey allowed herself a small smile. No one who knows me that well. He looked at her for one last second, and an expression crossed his face that had no name. Then he nodded once and walked back toward the house. For the first time, Audrey watched him leave without feeling that he was taking a piece of trouble with him. He was carrying some of it away. Audrey found out 6 days before the wedding. She had not meant to take the test that morning. There were fittings scheduled, foundation calls, a final meeting with the florist, and a list of guest adjustments long enough to make even Michael's composure look strained. But she had woken with a strange heaviness in her body and a sudden, unreasonable certainty that made her sit very still on the edge of the bed before she reached for the small box she had hidden in the back of a drawer 2 days earlier. Afterward, she was standing in the bathroom in her silk robe, staring down at the result while the house was moving on around her, unaware that the ground beneath her life had shifted again. Silvio's child. Her hand moved to her stomach before she could think, resting there with wonder, fear, and a tenderness that almost hurt. Downstairs, the folder for the Lucia Gallo Women's Care Fund waited on Silvio's desk, full of statistics and architectural drafts for the first maternal care wing. Audrey had spent weeks turning one woman's death into a promise that other women might live. Now the promise had become personal. She found Silvio in his study, reading through the final wedding security plan with Michael. One look at her face, and Silvio dismissed him with a quiet word. Michael left at once. Silvio stood. Audrey. She closed the door behind her and held the test in her hand, hidden against the fold of her robe for one more second, because once she showed him, neither of them could return to the room they had been standing in before. Then she placed it on the desk between them. Silvio looked down. For a moment he did not understand. Then he did. The color left his face so quickly that Audrey felt her own heart twist. He reached for neither the test nor for her. His hand hovered at his side, as if his body wanted to move, and some old terror had seized it by the wrist. Audrey crossed to him slowly. "Silvio." His eyes lifted to hers, and there it was. The boy from the wound, the child born into blood and silence, the man who still believed beginnings could carry death inside them. Audrey took his hand. "This is not the day you were born." His breath broke in a way she had never heard before. She brought his hand to her stomach and held it there with both of hers. "This one starts differently." Silvio was looking at their hands, his over hers over his, layered the way things are when they have stopped being separate. The silence in the room held. His voice came rough and low. "I can protect you." Audrey's eyes softened. "You can love us." His gaze returned to hers. "That will be harder for you." Silvio stared at her for a long moment, and then the fear in his face changed shape. It did not disappear. Audrey did not think of fear that old vanished because someone asked it to. But it moved. It made room. He sank to his knees in front of her, not dramatically, not as a gesture for anyone to see, but as if his body had finally found the only place it could go. His forehead touched the place where their hands rested. Audrey's fingers slid into his hair. For the first time in his life, Silvio Gallo looked at the beginning of a life and did not see death waiting behind it. He felt Audrey's hands over his, steady and warm, teaching him where to place his fear. On the morning of her wedding, Audrey stood before the mirror and waited for fear to find her. It did not. The last time she had worn white, her body had been searching for an exit. This time her hand rested briefly over the child beneath the gown, and her feet were steady. When Michael came to tell her Silvio was waiting, Audrey asked only one thing. "Where is Aldo?" Michael's pause was small enough for anyone else to miss. Audrey did not miss it. "He is near the shore." She lifted the skirt enough to move. "I'll be 5 minutes." Michael's expression did not change, but the air around him sharpened with concern. "Mrs. Gallo." Audrey met his eyes through the mirror. "I'm not running." He stepped aside. The shore was bright and restless under the morning wind. Aldo was standing near the edge of the sand with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the sea. He heard her before he turned. Audrey stopped a few feet from him. For once his face did not reach for a joke immediately. The wind caught her veil, and the thin fabric of her gown shifted around her shoulders in the salt air. Aldo watched it for a second, then slipped out of his jacket and placed it over her shoulders without making a ceremony of it. A bride shouldn't freeze before making the entire family behave. Audrey looked at him. Was that concern, Aldo? His gaze returned to the water. Don't insult me on your wedding day. Then his mouth curved. Careful, Audrey. People may start thinking you have a habit of disappearing in wedding dresses. I'm not disappearing. His eyes moved over the dress, then back to her face. Then what are you doing? Making sure you don't. Aldo's smile faded by degrees. Audrey stepped closer. I'm walking to him in a few minutes. I need to know if you're going to stand there like his brother or like his enemy. Aldo's gaze sharpened. And if I say enemy? Then I'll still walk to him. Her voice stayed steady. But he'll lose something tonight he shouldn't have to lose. That reached him. You think I matter that much to him? I think you matter more than either of you knows what to do with. Aldo let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh and almost a concession. A broken little smile touched his mouth. Terrible taste. Both of you. Audrey smiled. Aldo looked back toward the house. For a moment he seemed younger, stripped of the polished cruelty he wore so well. Tell him I'll be there, he said. Audrey lifted one eyebrow. Tell him yourself. His mouth curved, warmer this time. Bossy bride. Family habit. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Audrey. When she looked back, the performance had fallen from his face. Thank you for not treating me like the villain in his story. The wind moved between them, carrying salt and a quiet that felt earned. Then don't become one. Aldo lowered his head once, a promise he was not yet ready to name. Audrey lifted her dress from the sand and walked back toward the house. Silvio was waiting by the rear doors when she returned, standing completely still, one hand at his side, the other clenched loosely as if he had told himself not to move. His eyes moved from the wind-tossed veil to the sand-brushed edge of her gown, then to her face. You went to the shore. Audrey walked up the last step toward him. I came back. The answer softened his expression. Then his mouth tilted just enough to let the danger become humor. You have a history of disappearing in wedding dresses. Audrey slipped her hand into his. I wasn't running. His thumb moved over her knuckles, slow and warm. Then were you running to me? She looked at him for a long moment. I was making sure I could walk to you with your family still whole. Silvio lifted her hand to his mouth. He had no answer sharp enough to hide the feeling in his eyes. His lips found her fingers instead. Inside, white flowers climbed the old stone. Martha was crying before Audrey reached the aisle, and Arthur sat beside her with his jaw tight, pretending he was not seconds away from doing the same. Michael stood near the front, still as ever, while Aldo watched from the first row without a glass in his hand. Then the chapel doors opened. Audrey walked. The last time she had worn a wedding dress, she had run barefoot into Silvio Gallo's world with no plan and no place to go. This time, Silvio did not come for her. He waited. For a man who had built his life on control, waiting was the most intimate thing he could offer. When she reached him, he exhaled, barely, just once, as if he had been holding his breath since the shore. The first time I made you my wife because I needed you, he said. Today, I marry you because I choose you. Audrey's fingers tightened around his. The first time I stood in a wedding dress, I was trying to survive the wrong life. Today, I'm walking into the one I choose. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. Silvio kissed her like the room did not exist. Aldo's quiet laugh carried from the front row. Progress. That night, the house changed its clothes. The great hall filled with dark suits, old names, and men trying to look as though the weight of the room did not reach their bones. Michael stepped forward with an old leather book. The house is settled, the name continues, the family recognizes Silvio Gallo. One by one the men came forward. Some bowed their heads, some touched Silvio's hand. Some spoke old words in low voices Audrey did not fully understand, but felt in the room like a weather change. Then Aldo moved. The entire room noticed. He walked to the front with his hands empty. No glass, no armor. He stopped before Silvio, close enough that the resemblance between them became almost cruel. Then he looked at Audrey. Only once. The shore passed between them, the old wound, the warning she had given him, and the door she had left open. Aldo turned back to his brother. I spent too many years mistaking pain for a birthright. The room went very still. The chair is yours. His jaw tightened. But I will not stand outside this family anymore. Silvio watched him for a long moment. Then he stepped down from the head of the table and crossed the small space between them. Then stand beside me. Aldo's face changed, only for a second, but enough. He reached for Silvio's hand and touched the family ring. The old gesture, his head lowered just enough to honor the moment without pretending he had become a different man overnight. My loyalty. Silvio's hand closed around his brother's. Your place. Michael closed the leather book. The sound was small. The meaning was not. Later, Michael handed Silvio a folded report. Max Gordon had tried to leak the coercion story before the wedding. Aldo had stopped it before it reached the press. Silvio looked at him. You handled Gordon, Aldo shrugged. He was boring. That was all he gave them, but Audrey understood. Aldo had chosen a side before he had spoken the words aloud. His gaze dropped briefly, almost carelessly, to the way Silvio's hand rested at Audrey's waist. Then lower, for a fraction of a second, to the place where Silvio's thumb had unconsciously settled over the flat of her stomach. Aldo went still. Audrey saw the exact moment he understood. His eyes lifted to hers. Well, his voice came lower. That explains why he looks ready to murder the air around you. Silvio's hand tightened. Audrey smiled, small and warm. Behave, Uncle Aldo. Aldo blinked. For the first time all night, no mask arrived fast enough. Uncle Aldo, he repeated, as if the words belonged to a language he had never expected anyone to offer him. He cleared his throat and recovered badly on purpose. God help the child. Audrey's smile widened. I'm counting on you to be the bad influence. Aldo placed a hand over his heart with wounded dignity. That, Mrs. Gallo, I can do. Silvio looked at his brother with an expression that still held warning, still held history, but no longer held the certainty of war. If the child comes home quoting you, I will know who to blame. Aldo's eyes warmed despite the sharpness of his smile. At last, a meaningful role in this family. Months later, Lucia Gallo's name was carved into pale stone above the entrance of the new maternal care wing overlooking the harbour. By then, Arthur Palmer's restaurant was still open, the sign freshly painted, the kitchen louder than ever. Silvio had not bought Arthur Palmer a restaurant. He had done something harder for a proud man to accept. He had made sure Arthur could keep the one he had built himself. Audrey was standing beside Silvio beneath the sign, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her stomach. The baby moved just as the applause began. Her breath caught in a small laugh. Silvio looked down immediately, his hand coming to cover hers. He did not speak. His thumb moved slowly over her hand, as if he were learning something he had not known how to want. Aldo was standing on her other side, hands in his coat pockets, pretending not to watch with the open fascination of a man trying to look unimpressed by a miracle. Silvio's gaze moved up to the stone name above the doors. Then his voice came quietly, meant only for Audrey. You gave my mother's name back to something living. Audrey leaned into him slightly. Maybe that's what families are supposed to do. His hand spread more fully over hers. Still afraid? She asked. Silvio did not pretend. Every day. He bent his head, his mouth close to her temple. But I'm learning not to call fear control. Aldo's voice came from beside them, dry as ever. If the child gets my charm, you are both doomed. Silvio did not look away from Audrey. If the child gets your judgment, we're changing the locks. Aldo sighed. Cruel. Accurate, perhaps, but cruel. Then his gaze dropped to Audrey's stomach, and his mouth curved. Don't worry, Dante. Your uncle is the only reasonable man in this family. Audrey's eyebrows lifted, amused. My son's name is Leone. Silvio's eyes narrowed, not cold, not real. The look of a man performing indignation and enjoying it. No one asked me? His hand spread over Audrey's stomach, possessive and warm. I'm supposed to be the controlling one in this family. I should have named my own son. Aldo placed a hand over his heart. Poor Dante. Rejected before birth. Audrey laughed, and the sound moved through the cold morning like warmth, The harbour glittered below them, cold and bright and indifferent to everything that had changed. She had run into Silvio Gallo's world barefoot, terrified and wearing another man's wedding dress. Months later, she stood beside him with his ring on her hand, his child beneath her heart, and no desire left to run from the life she had finally chosen. Thank you for watching Audrey and Silvio's story until the end. Before you go, tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you the most? And have you ever walked away from a wedding, an engagement, or a relationship at the last moment because something inside you knew it wasn't right? If Audrey and Silvio's story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Stories That See You, and turn on notifications for the next romance. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.